Chapter 428. It's the current High City branch of the Shine Group, the predecessor of the MO Corporation. The land next to it used to be a bank, but it was demolished and rebuilt. Now it's an office building with more than 80 floors as tall as the Shine Group. Xia Tian wanted to say that if Jin Wan's office was on the top floor, she could be Mo Jingshan's neighbor. After all, they had the same height, the same floor, and the same floor-to-ceiling windows. They could see each other as soon as they turned around. However, before Xia Tian could finish her words, she saw Jin Wan's expressionless face. Jin Wan. No. Xia Tian. But although this building is big enough, MN Group is not an ordinary small company in the world. It ranks among the top 10 Chinese companies. Don't you feel aggrieved staying in an office building on the west side of the city? Why should I feel aggrieved? High City is so big and there are many office buildings in the city center. If the west side can't accommodate it, we can go to the east, north, or south of the city or the commercial district. Although the office buildings on the commercial district are expensive, we can afford them. Why do you want me to go to the city center? Xia Tian choked for a moment. She didn't say anything more to avoid provoking her. That night, when the people of MN Group got off work, Xia Tian asked Jin Wan on behalf of several old colleagues in the company if she would like to have dinner with them in the evening. However, when they reached the door of the office, they saw that Jin Wan had come out. The woman in a red dress was beautiful. Even if she just walked out of the office, she was dazzling, and several male employees who had just passed by on this floor stared at her. Xiaoba and the others asked if you want to have dinner tonight. Let's talk about it another day. I just came back today. I'll go home and tidy up tonight. Jin Wan pressed the button of the elevator and said indifferently, I don't need to rush to the company. I have to go back to the Ji family. I haven't asked about Ji Menggran for the past 2 days, but recently I heard that there seems to be some news about her. I have to go back and have a look. Okay, then let's move the dinner to the weekend. You haven't been back for more than 3 years, and we old colleagues have been helping you keep the family business in High City. We should get together. Sure. As Jin Wan spoke, the elevator door opened. She turned back and smiled at Xia Tian and the colleagues behind her. Everyone, see you tomorrow. Even when the elevator door closed, Xia Tian still stood there and looked at the door. After a long silence, she turned to look at little Mina, who was about to turn around and go to work. She reached out and grabbed her clothes. Xiaoba stumbled as he was pulled. He quickly stabilized his body and turned around in surprise. Sister Xia? Xia Tian pointed to the elevator with her chin and asked, Has Jin Wan been like this in England all these years? What state? Little 8 was a little confused. Just like that? Didn't you say that Mr. Vince often went to England for the past 3 years? Didn't you say that Mr. Vince had been pursuing her, but she had never fallen for him? Did she mention Mo Jingshan? Little 8 shook his head. Never mentioned it. Regarding Mo Jingshan, she hasn't mentioned a single word. Little 8 continued to shake his head. Indeed, he never mentioned it. That night, Jin Wan returned to the apartment of more than 200 square meters that she bought 3 years ago before she went to London. The apartment was near the original office building and was still some distance from the west side of the city. Xia Tian had arranged a car for her to drive back, but in the past 3 years many roads in High City had been built. She was afraid that she might not be familiar with many roads and take the wrong one, so she didn't drive but took a taxi back. In fact, she had only lived in this apartment for 2 or 3 days. After leaving a lot of luggage here, she left and didn't even clean up the room. She opened the door and went in, only to find that nothing had changed inside, but no one had come in to clean it for 3 years. All the furniture was covered with dust, and the suitcases were also covered with a thin layer of dust. Jin Wan walked in with the suitcase in her hand and called the security guard to hire an auntie from a cleaning company. Together with the auntie, she spent more than an hour cleaning up the apartment inside and outside. When the aunt left, Jin Wan went inside and opened the suitcases she had left behind. The clothes she had worn in High City 3 years ago reappeared in her sight, the computer she had used 3 years ago, some paraphernalia, all kinds of, she might live here for a while, so she hung all the clothes she could still wear in the cabinet. When all the suitcases were empty, she picked up the last suitcase and took out all the things in it. She saw the velvet box at the bottom. She paused, looked at the velvet box for a few seconds and then looked away. She knew it was the blue diamond in it. She picked it up, threw a pile of mobile phones, computer chargers and other things into the drawer in the middle of the cabinet, closed the drawer without looking at it, and turned to continue to pack other things. It wasn't until 11 o'clock at night that Jin Wan took a shower and sat down on the sofa tiredly. There were still some daily necessities she hadn't bought. She would buy them tomorrow night. She was really exhausted tonight. After taking such a long flight and dealing with the problem of Heng Cheng Company, she hadn't rested until now and was seriously out of strength. Just as Jean Wan was about to fall asleep on the sofa, her cell phone suddenly beeped, indicating that the cell phone was low on battery. She touched the sofa with her eyes closed and took a look at the cell phone. There was only 5% battery left. She had just returned to China and didn't know how many things she had to do and how many calls she had to answer from tomorrow. No matter how tired she was, she got up and went back to the bedroom, opened the cabinet and took out the charger from the drawer. As soon as she took out the charger, the velvet box she had thrown in the cabinet was scratched open by a wire, and the blue diamond safely placed in it fell out of the box, fell on the carpet at Jean Wan's feet, rolled on it and finally stopped. Jean Wan paused for a moment and lowered her eyes to look at the blue diamond on the carpet. She slowly plugged in the charger, squatted down and picked up the blue diamond. The light in the bedroom was not turned on, and the blue diamond was reflected by the moonlight coming in through the window. If she suddenly decided to return something that she couldn't return 3 years ago, she would be provoking Grandfather Mo and the Mo family. But if she didn't return it, what should she do with this diamond? Would she just leave such a precious thing at home for no reason? Chapter 429. The next morning, Jean Wan went back to the Ji family. In the past 3 years, Ji Hongwen was still the same. When he was in good health, he could walk alone, but when he was in poor health, he had to walk slowly or ask his assistant to help him. Fortunately, Ji Hongwen didn't have any serious illness, so the Ji family didn't go bankrupt, and Ji Hongwen didn't die in the hospital. Instead, the Ji Corporation was more stable in the business circle than before because Jean Wan invested a sum of money in some new projects. Dad, didn't you say Minggran returned to High City 2 years ago? Didn't she tell you where she was in the past year? Jean Wan helped Ji Hongwen walk on the lawn in the front yard of the Ji family. Ji Hongwen smiled. No, it's good that she's still alive. She didn't want to tell me, so I didn't ask. Besides, she rarely returned to the Ji family in the past 2 years. Instead, he paused and took a look at Jean Wan. Minggran almost doesn't regard the Ji family as her home. I rarely see her, but the only thing I'm sure is that she doesn't have to worry about food and shelter. She must have a good backer. A few days ago, I heard from a servant that she saw Minggran in the department store. She got into the Xing family's car. The Xing family? Xing Yihan? Jean Wan's gaze faltered, and she exchanged a silent look with Ji Hongwen. Even though Ji Hongwen didn't say much, his meaning was obvious. He gave her some hints. But after all, Minggran was his daughter. He couldn't directly remind Jean Wan to be careful of the Xing family, but he wanted to let Jean Wan know. Jean Wan continued to walk with Ji Hongwen's help, saying, I know. Don't worry. As long as Minggran doesn't target me, I won't make trouble for her. Ji Hongwen sighed. I also hope that she won't target you. Even if she does, with her little ability, she'll just run in front of you and show her cowardice. Of course not. Don't underestimate your daughter. Minggran is very thoughtful. She won't let herself be taken advantage of. Besides, she has Xing Yihan as her backer now, doesn't she? Jean Wan curved her lips into a smile. She had said these words to make Ji Hongwen happy. Toward Ji Minggran, she had never intended to be soft-hearted. Ji Hongwen shook his head, coughed, and asked Jean Wan to help him sit down on the bench in the yard. After sitting down, Ji Hongwen sighed. If Xing Yihan really loves her, then it's fine. But I know how he feels about you and Minggran. He won't easily change his mind. As for keeping Minggran by his side, I'm afraid he has other plans. When the two of them got together, it was nothing more than a superficial effort. To put it bluntly, they were using each other to get what they needed. Jean Wan didn't say much but just smiled. Dad, don't worry. I'm not a child anymore. I'm in control of my own life. What path I want to take is also my own choice. It's useless for you to worry about it. Ji Hongwen nodded and sighed. Yes, you've all grown up. I really can't care too much. Both of you have your own things to do, especially you. In just a few years, you have become the benchmark of young female entrepreneurs in the business world. I was not as good as you when I was young. With this, Ji Hongwen paused and then said, It's been some years since your mother passed away. In a few days, when I feel better, accompany me to the temple to worship her. By the way, let her see how you look now so that she can rest assured in heaven. Okay. Jean Wan helped him up from the bench. In the afternoon, before the MN group got off work, Jean Wan went to the company. Seeing her, Xiaoxi came over with her round belly and asked her at the desk, Did you go back to the Ji family to see your father this morning? Yes. Before she said a few words, Jean Wan's cell phone rang. She asked Xia Tian to sit aside and not to keep swaying in front of her with her big belly. Then she picked up the phone, walked to the window and picked it up. Miss G, the things you sent from England to Los Angeles a few days ago were not received. Shall we send them back to London for you, or what shall we do with them? How could they not be received? Couldn't they have been sent back in the past few years? Well, these things were sent to the prison every few months. Elder Sue passed away 2 years ago. If Sue Jilan couldn't receive them, no one in the Sue family could receive them for her. But I forgot to tell you that Sue Jilan committed suicide by taking poison in prison at the end of last month. Jean Wan's expression remained unchanged as she looked at the street outside the French window. Committed suicide by taking poison? Yes, Sue Jilan committed suicide on the 28th of last month. I got it. Destroy all the things I sent. Okay. Do you have any other instructions, Miss G? How did she die? Was it because she had taken chronic poison for a long time? The person on the other end of the line was surprised. How did you know? Jean Wan didn't speak anymore and hung up. Jean Wan had just come back yesterday, so they didn't have a chance to talk much. Xia Tian waited for her all morning and finally got her back. However, Jean Wan stood by the window after answering the phone. Even though she could only see her back, she looked so cold that she didn't dare to approach her. What's wrong? Xia Tian asked. Jean Wan turned back to her desk and sat down in silence. Su Jilan was dead. She committed suicide by taking poison? Jean Wan had contacted Su Shui's parents and asked them to send Su Shui's belongings and Su Shui's childhood diary to her. She had read Su Shui's childhood diary and specially selected the pages where Su Shui wrote about how good she was with cousin Su Jilan, how they went out to play together, and how they loved each other as sisters. She sent the diary and Su Jilan's belongings to Su Jilan's prison every few months as long as she had time. Su Jilan was a silly cousin who always thought they loved each other so much that she sacrificed her life, and Su Jilan was a cousin who was locked up in prison and deprived of freedom forever. Jean Wan had never forgotten the pool of blood that flowed between her legs after she fell off the Los Angeles freeway. She had never forgotten to avenge her child. Even though Su Jilan had gotten the punishment she deserved and was losing weight in prison, and even tried to commit suicide several times, she still tortured her mind with these things again and again. Before flying back to High City from London, Jean Wan sent Su Shui's last diary and belongings to her, but she didn't expect that Su Jilan was dead. Chapter 430. How could it be exactly the same? It was said that Su Jilan had tried to escape from prison, but she was caught before she could escape the encirclement. She mutilated herself in prison and even threatened the police by cutting herself with a blade. The police were indifferent and even transferred her to a dark prison where she couldn't even see the sun. It was as if there was a huge net that was pushing everything forward, pushing the original trajectory of everything forward repeatedly. Everything seemed to be the same as in her previous life. The only difference was that all the twists and turns and frame-ups Jean Wan had experienced were done for her by others. When the truck driver died of poisoning in prison, Jean Wan wondered if the real cause of her death in her previous life had something to do with Su Jilan, and if Su Jilan had always regarded her as a thorn in her side. But now Su Jilan's experience and cause of death were almost copied from Jean Wan's. Except for the difference between Los Angeles and High City, and the twists and turns in the middle, the cause and the result were the same. Even 7 years earlier, everything had returned to the original point. Who on earth was driving all this? Jean Wan's life had been completely turned upside down in her previous life, but now it was completely righted. If everything went according to the trajectory of her previous life, then Jean Wan, the lifeline that was broken by Su Jilan, now fell on Su Jilan's head. Did this mean that the murderer of her previous life took over this trajectory for her? Did she die because of the cause and effect of her previous life? If she hadn't been reborn, Jean Wan would never have such a bizarre idea, but at this moment she had to think so. So, was there some kind of omen or was it all caused by someone? On the weekend, Jean Wan accompanied Ji Hongwen to the temple. In the past, Ji Hongwen had the habit of visiting the temple every year. However, at that time, Jean Wan was still young and her temperament was unstable. He was afraid that she and Ji Menggran, these two little girls, would be disrespectful to the various gods in the temple, so he never brought them here. After your mother passes away, I'll come here when I have time. Go inside and burn some incense. Ji Hongwen handed 3 lit incense sticks to Jean Wan. Jean Wan received the incense and turned to enter. After that, Jean Wan accompanied Ji Hongwen to worship in the temple for more than half an hour. Seeing that Jean Wan didn't seem to be used to the atmosphere in the temple, Ji Hongwen patted her hand and said, "I'll go inside for a while and talk to a master I've known for many years. You can walk outside or find a shady place to sit down and wait for me." Jean Wan nodded. It was rare for her to return home, so she was patient. All right. When Ji Hongwen went inside, Jin Wan turned around and found a place with few people on the bluestone path in the temple to stand for a while. Then she felt the sun was too hot, so she turned to rest under an ancient banyan tree that had grown here for who knew how many years. She had heard that it was best not to touch a cell phone in the temple, let alone take photos. Bored, she pulled out her hand that had reached into her bag. She heard someone next to her shaking the lot holder and mumbling something. She looked around and saw that many people were shaking the lot holder. After more than half an hour, it was almost afternoon, and there were fewer and fewer people. Looking at the lot holder quietly placed there, she didn't know what she wanted. Perhaps it was too boring to wait here, so she got up and picked up the lot holder. She imitated those people and shook it for a long time until a brand new long red lot fell on the table. Jin Wan glanced at the round shape drawn with a golden pen on the long lot and felt a little strange. She really couldn't understand it, so she picked up the other long lots in the lot holder and found that many of them were written with the words top, bottom, middle, and so on, but there were also some pictures and words that she couldn't understand, and the content of each lot was different. She picked up the one that had fallen out and turned to an old master who was also enjoying the shade under the tree. "Master, may I ask you to interpret the lot?" Just now, she saw that the people who had shaken the lot earlier seemed to come to this old master. The old master glanced at her, then at the long lot in her hand, and immediately looked at her in surprise. "Little girl, did you shake it out or deliberately draw it out from inside?" "Of course I shook it out." The old master took her long lot, looked at it for a while and smiled. "Don't you find that the other long lots in the lot holder have become lighter in color and look very old? Only this one is new?" "I found it." Jin Wan had just noticed it. Since ancient times, the lot holders in all temples have been very meaningful. They usually carry incense, so if there are no special circumstances, the lot inside will not be changed, but the one before this long lot, probably because it has been too long, the circle on it has become dilapidated and lost the meaning of the circle. So only this lot has been replaced with a new one. It was changed not long ago, and the new lot hasn't been weathered much. It is lighter than the other lots and it is very difficult to shake it out. During this time, no one has been able to shake it out, but you are the first one to shake it out. Jin Wan didn't quite understand what he meant, but seeing the old master smiling, she asked patiently and casually, "So? What's the meaning of this circle?" A circle is a line centered on a point, always around a central point, walking along the same trajectory without deviation or break point. The old master said with a smile, "It indicates perfection, the completeness of the trajectory of your life, and the return to the origin, which means that you will never go astray again." Jin Wan looked at the circle on the long lot and froze. The origin again. She had heard this word many times 3 years ago. If you had gotten a long stick that hadn't been changed before, the circle wouldn't be complete. After being exposed to the wind and the sun, there would be many broken points and the stick would be full of danger. However, this new stick that you got means that you've avoided those broken points. Come to think of it, it's strange. This sign has been here for more than 10 years, but it was changed just before you shook it out. It seems that you must have had some unusual experience to be able to jump over those broken tracks. This new circle perhaps represents a brand new life, which means that it's very complete. The old master put his palms together and bowed to her, then turned to continue to interpret the lots for others. Jin Wan stood by the side, holding the long lot and looking at the new circle without any broken points. A new life. Chapter 431. In 2 weeks, all the procedures for MN Group's headquarters to move back to China had been completed, and many tricky things had been handled. In the end, Jin Wan decided to temporarily set the company's headquarters on the west side of the city and bought 2 more 30-story office buildings behind the original office building. In the past few years, because the company was just established in the UK, there were many social events to attend, so Jin Wan's alcohol tolerance really soared. Now she was no longer the kind of person who would collapse after 1 or 2 drinks, but she still instinctively disliked alcohol. During the period after returning to China, Jin Wan cultivated herself and didn't drink or socialize. Except for the old staff dinner she attended once, she basically went to work during the day and returned to her apartment after work at night. She went to bed early and got up early, adjusting her life to a very regular pattern. She was much better than when she first returned to China. Xia Tian might go into labor at any time this month. Sometimes she almost couldn't walk in the company with her hands on her waist, but she still refused to rest at home. Jin Wan arranged an office for her and asked her to read the company's documents from time to time. She didn't need to worry about other things. But Jean Wan hadn't decided who would be promoted to vice president, so she had to deal with some trivial things in person. For example, this Friday, there would be a real estate and architecture exhibition held in the High City Exhibition Center. Because many provincial and municipal leaders would go, the leaders of major real estate companies or companies involved in the real estate and construction industry would go. Xia Tian couldn't attend this kind of event now, so Jean Wan had to go. Boss, it is said that many famous people in High City's business circle will go to this exhibition. It seems that in addition to the exhibition, there will be a bidding conference, and then the Municipal Tourism Bureau will invite all the distinguished guests to try to stay in the newly built seaside resort in the south of High City for 2 nights, but the quota is limited. It seems that I can't go with you. Xiao Ba handed the exhibition invitation to Jean Wan and said with a regretful and disappointed expression. Try to stay for 2 nights? Hasn't High City been expanding its tourism industry for the past few years? That seaside resort was jointly built by the government, the city's tourism bureau, and several well-known companies in the city. It's about to open to the public, but before it opens to the public, we're inviting you industry bigwigs to enjoy it first. To put it bluntly, we're inviting you bigwigs to the site in person. It's also a form of advertising for the resort. After all, so many bigwigs have tried staying there before. Let's go to the exhibition first. As for the invitation to stay, we'll see how it goes. Jean Wan put down the invitation and glanced at Xiao Ba. If you want to go, why don't you go for me? The corner of Xiao Ba's mouth twitched. The people going there are all extraordinary people. In our entire company, only you and Sister Xia can go. After all, one is the president and the other is the vice president. If I, as a special assistant, go, won't I be giving our MN group a hard time? Jean Wan couldn't help chuckling at Xiao Ba's choice of words. She glanced at her. Which big boss in the business world isn't busy every day? How would she have the time to attend such an event? Anyway, it's the face of the leaders of the province and the city. No matter how busy they are, there will always be a lot of people who will go, even if it's just a formality. Jean Wan didn't say more. Anyway, there were still 2 days before Friday and there was no hurry. As Xiao Ba said, she would go as a formality. Boss, don't take it lightly. Boss, don't take it lightly. Sister Xia has talked to me before. You may not know how terrible the change in High City's business circle has been in the past few years. 3 years ago, some of the companies that you were familiar with closed down or were acquired. However, many companies have risen in the past 3 years, so you may not know many of them, and you may not know the current situation in High City. The cooperation between business and government has always been the trend in the real estate industry, so they will definitely give you face. Okay, I'll definitely go and I'll definitely pay attention to it. I won't be perfunctory, okay? Jean Wan tooted and threw the folder in her hand into her arms. Don't hang out with Xia Tian in the future. Now you're learning to nag like her. Then you can dress up well. Don't be too casual, okay? Jean Wan glanced at her again. Xiao Ba immediately took a big step back and quickly left the office before Jean Wan kicked her off the floor-to-ceiling window out of impatience. However, the truth was that on Friday afternoon, Jean Wan was dragged home by Xia Tian and Xiao Ba. Xia Tian had ordered a dress for Jean Wan in advance. It was a blue strapless evening gown. The color was very clean and fresh, which was Jean Wan's favorite style. However, Jean Wan couldn't understand why the two of them were so excited over such an event. They either reminded her to take it seriously or reminded her to dress up well. It was only the afternoon, but they had already dragged her home to help her try on her gown and do her hair. They had even bought her matching shoes. Jean Wan deeply suspected that they didn't want her to attend an event at all but to go on a blind date. After Jean Wan was forced to change her clothes, the stylist they brought pressed her onto a chair and did a simple hairstyle. Xiao Ba had just stood up when she heard Xiao Ba shouting from behind, "Oh my God, it's too beautiful. Boss, this blue isn't something an ordinary person can handle. You're really too white. Sob, I'm so envious, jealous and hateful. You look so beautiful in this color." Xiao Ba stamped her feet excitedly as she spoke and then turned her eyes to Xia Tian with a sneaky smile. Jean Wan glanced at her indifferently. "What on earth haven't you two told me? Isn't it just an exhibition?" "It's an exhibition, but it's rare to see such a gathering of big shots. You're the pillar of our company and you've just entered the Forbes list this year. Many people are curious about you. Since you've returned to China and it's your first time attending such a large-scale event, you can't bring shame to our company, can you?" Xia Tian said and stared at Jean Wan's neck. "Is there something missing?" "There is indeed something missing." Xiao Ba also stared at Jean Wan's neck. "Such a beautiful collarbone. It would be perfect if there were a beautiful diamond in the middle. Jinwan's eyelids twitched. Before she spoke, the two women ran into her bedroom and rummaged for a long time but couldn't find any jewelry. Just as Xia Tian was complaining that Jinwan didn't even have jewelry in her house, Xiaoba opened the drawer in the middle of the cabinet. A moment later she shouted, "Found it!" Chapter 432. On the night of the exhibition, Jinwan arrived at High City's exhibition center by car. Before alighting, she thought for a moment before removing the necklace from her neck and placing it in her bag. At that time, the stylist that Xiaoba and Xia Tian brought along carried several platinum necklaces with her. This type of stylist was familiar with the preferences of the rich ladies of the upper class. Nowadays, many people like to buy these types of uncut diamonds to keep at home. Whenever there was a banquet or event, they would pick out some nice-looking necklaces to match. In the middle of the necklaces, there was a semi-net made of platinum that perfectly fit the blue diamond, turning it into a luxurious blue diamond necklace. When she wore it back then, it was indeed beautiful. This 10-carat blue diamond was too rare, and a blue diamond of such purity was even harder to find in the world. Wearing it like this at such a gathering of important people would be too conspicuous. MN Group had been rising rapidly in the past few years and was viewed as a thorn in the side by many in the industry. Having just returned to the country, it would attract the attention of many in the industry. It was better not to attract too much attention, so Jinwan decided not to wear it. After alighting from the car, a staff member at the entrance of the exhibition center was responsible for checking the invitation in her hands. He then respectfully guided her to the red carpet. After passing through the red carpet, she would arrive at the main entrance of the exhibition center. Jinwan smiled and walked toward the red carpet. Just as Xiaoba had said, High City's upper class had undergone a change of dynasties in the past 3 years. Many of the important people were unfamiliar faces. Even if there were a few who looked familiar, almost none of them recognized Jinwan. The woman was dressed in a blue dress that perfectly complemented her graceful figure. Her exquisite face was lightly made up, and her fair and tender skin appeared pure and clear under the lights of the exhibition center. The convention center was not a place that ordinary people could enter. The people present were either the heads of famous companies or the young ladies of influential families. Some of them had seen Jinwan at other banquets and could more or less recognize her. However, they did not dare to recognize her at this moment. In the past, Ji Ming was already beautiful enough, but now, on this red carpet, everyone present seemed to have become the background. The woman in the blue dress was like a goddess walking out of a Western painting, elegant and sexy. This kind of blue softened the pure beauty of Eastern women, and her fair and delicate face seemed to be the most precious treasure in the world. As the saying goes, a woman is all about her bones, not her skin. What's rare is that she has a good appearance and a beautiful body. There's not a single part of her that can be picked on. Even some of the media hidden in the crowd couldn't help but raise their cameras to take pictures in that direction. Jinwan strode forward as though there was no one around, allowing everyone's eyes to fall on her. She smiled politely at the people around her, lifted the hem of her skirt that reached her feet, and walked into the main entrance of the exhibition center under the guidance of the security guards. She was neither early nor late. She was at least 20 minutes earlier than the time stated on the invitation. There were already many people gathered in the exhibition center. In the center of the hall, there was a huge overlooking model of the entire high city that was thousands of meters wide. Every building and location that was built or tendered by the major companies was marked out. From time to time, people in the crowd greeted her. Some knew her, some didn't, and even if they didn't know her before, they had studied MN Group because of Jinwan's ranking on Forbes this year and had seen her photos. Jinwan smiled at everyone who greeted her and did not say much. At most she would say, "Hello." At 7 o'clock in the evening, the exhibition had already begun. Before Jinwan could go to the location with her company's logo, she suddenly heard the whispers of several reporters not far away. "Earlier, I heard from the people at the entrance that Shine Group's CEO Mo is here. Hurry up and go take some pictures. It's rare to get CEO Mo's face. He's been in Los Angeles for the past few years and hasn't appeared in front of the media since returning to China. Hurry up and take some pictures, hurry up." As the reporters turned around and quietly rushed toward the entrance, Jinwan turned around and saw that there were already quite a number of people in front of the exhibition center. Shenmu raised his hand to stop the reporters from getting too close. At the same time, he smiled politely and greeted the reporters, telling them not to take any pictures. This was an official event, not some celebrity news event. It was not suitable for the reporters to participate. By Shenmu's side, there was a quiet, tall and yet extremely eye-catching figure. His face was cold and handsome, like an outstanding creation of God's uncanny workmanship. The man's suit was well ironed, and his shirt was buttoned up to the top. He was meticulous, cold and noble. His eyes were deep and clear, and his tall figure was much taller than Shinmu, who was 1.8 meters tall. In the eyes of many women, this man who was rarely seen was mysterious, abstinent and cold and seductive. It was this man who, in just a few seconds, caused the smile on Jinwan's face to subside slightly. In the past 3 years, she never thought that there would be a day when they would meet again after such a long separation. Perhaps, from the moment this man pushed her away step by step, she should have guessed the result. Perhaps it would be another 10 years of separation, or perhaps they would never meet again in this lifetime. However, on the flight back to China, after learning about Shine Group's movements from Shinmu, she did not think about these things anymore. For example, she was not surprised to see Mo Jingshan here, but it was indeed a little sudden. Although it had been a long time since she asked about him, Jinwan had roughly heard from others. For example, he had become colder and more decisive in the business world, and was even more taciturn than before. He seemed to be the same as before, working, socializing and doing whatever he had to do. He did not reveal the slightest hint of his emotions in front of others, but the people around him and his business partners were all very careful, afraid that if they were not careful, they would step on a landmine and be destroyed by the powerful Shine Group. Because of the scene in front of the convention center, Jinwan's expression did not change much. She directly withdrew her gaze as though everything had nothing to do with her, and walked to her company's seat. However, for a moment she could not help but suspect if Xia Tian and Xiao Ba had dressed up so much today because they knew Mo Jingshan would come today. Jinwan pursed her lips and took out the bidding documents from her bag. She listened to the city leader's speech, and not long after she heard a faint commotion from behind. She indifferently glanced back, only to see Mo Jingshan walking in this direction of the crowd. Chapter 433. However, Shinmu's eyes were very sharp. He immediately spotted Jinwan. After glancing in her direction, he approached and greeted her. "COG." This time he called her COG, not Miss G. Shinmu knew why Jinwan would appear at this kind of exhibition, so he did not bring up the past. Jinwan nodded at Shinmu and could not help but look at Mo Jingshan. For a moment, when their eyes met, the man's gaze fell on her side. His pupils were dark and his gaze was clear. There were people all around them, and many of them were looking in this direction. Jinwan smiled and casually greeted, "Mo, nice to meet you." 4 simple words. She did not even say, "Long time no see." Instead she said, "Nice to meet you." Mo Jingshan nodded and gave her a very ordinary glance, as though it was indeed the first time they met in the business world and there was nothing special about it. The man shifted his gaze and walked toward the Shine Group's logo on the other side. At that moment, what Jinwan saw in the man's eyes was the same deep, calm and unperturbed as she remembered. The smile on Jinwan's lips did not change, but it remained polite and slightly cold. This kind of peace was good. At least, no one needed to deliberately avoid it. Seeing that Mo had left, Shinmu turned and smiled at Jinwan. "I don't think there's much opportunity to chat with Miss G on such an occasion. Did you come alone?" Jinwan did not nod or shake her head. She only curved her lips at Shinmu and slightly raised her hand to make an inviting gesture, meaning for him to go and not to be so polite to her. At the same time, when Jinwan withdrew her gaze, she caught a glimpse of the black suit Mo Jingshan was wearing. It was as heavy and black as ever, as though it could completely drown out all the storms that had happened around him. Time had passed, but he did not seem to have changed at all. 3 years had flowed on him, and he had lost his usual reserved and gentle temperament, leaving only a hint of ruthlessness and indifference. He was just a few meters away, but it seemed as though he was already far away and even more unreachable. But the man was still handsome and tall, as though he was made of nature. Mo Jingshan was no longer the man she had been separated from for 10 years. He was also no longer the man who had doted on her endlessly and was even willing to die for her. He seemed to have become the most complete him. This was his true appearance. Seeing that she had no intention of speaking, Shinmu could only nod at her and turn to leave. Mo Jingshan had already gone to the other side of the aisle. He did not even look at her. This reunion came and ended abruptly. However, it was just right so that she didn't feel awkward or uncomfortable. After the exhibition there was a party. Jinwan was still considering inviting the guests to stay in the seaside resort. Earlier at the exhibition she had seen 2 familiar figures. However, at that time, there were provincial and city leaders giving speeches. They were also discussing the development direction of High City with the business elites who were present based on the city's bidding and construction matters. It was not convenient for her to wander around in such a serious exhibition. At the end of the exhibition, melodious music rang in the exhibition hall. From time to time, people would raise their glasses and toast each other in groups of 3 to 5. From time to time, the CEOs of some companies who didn't have much impression of Jean Wan would raise their glasses to toast her. When they learned that Jean Wan was the CEO of MN Group, they repeatedly sighed in admiration. They handed their business cards and introduced each other to each other. Jean Wan couldn't leave them for a while. She was very beautiful. Her beautiful face and the faintly discernible coldness around her made men even more attracted to her. For such a woman, they really wanted to get to the bottom of it. At this moment, 2 old acquaintances suddenly came. When Ji Mingran appeared in Jean Wan's sight holding Sheng Yihan's arm, Jean Wan only looked at Ji Mingran's face for a few seconds, as though confirming that she was really alive. However, Ji Mingran's eyes were very sharp, as though there was a fire burning directly on Jean Wan. However, Jean Wan just glanced at her indifferently and raised her glass slightly. Ji Hongwen had already told her some of Ji Mingran's situation, so he didn't intend to say anything to her. However, Ji Mingran held Sheng Yihan's arm and seemed to snuggle intimately. When Jean Wan raised her glass slightly, she raised her eyebrows and smiled at her. "I thought you planned to live in England and never come back. I didn't expect that in just 3 years, you'd come back to High City. Is it because you can't make a living in London? Do you have to come back to a small place like High City?" Jean Wan's indifferent gaze fell on her and then glanced at Sheng Yihan beside her. When her gaze returned to Ji Mingran, she gave a faint smile. "High City is indeed a small place. I've only just come back and I've already met you. We've been seeing each other for so long. How small is this place? Mingran, even though you've been missing for so long, you still came back. Is it because you can't escape the circle of High City, or because you haven't made a name for yourself outside and have no choice but to come back to find a backer?" Ji Mingran snorted and turned to look at the man beside her. "Brother Sheng, you haven't contacted Jean Wan for a long time, have you? She seems to know nothing about what happened between us." Sheng Yihan's hand was placed by his side and was held tightly by Ji Mingran. Even though Sheng Yihan had no intention of being intimate in public, he paused and didn't push her away. He looked at Jean Wan, who was even more radiant than usual. After a moment of silence, he said mildly, "It's only been a few years, but you've transformed from a little woman into a strong woman in the industry. It's indeed an eye-opener. But High City is a place where too many people gather. There are many things that you can't easily control. Since you've returned to the country, remember to be less aggressive and keep as low a profile as possible." These words sounded like a kind suggestion, but because Ji Mingran was standing by the side, it seemed to be a kind of sarcasm. Jean Wan certainly knew that in the domestic business world, only by knowing when to advance and when to retreat could she protect herself. Although MN Group was now well known in the Chinese circle, after all, it hadn't been long since it was established. It wasn't difficult for it to be trampled under the foot of others. "CEO Sheng, are you saying kind words?" Jean Wan glanced at him without batting an eyelid, casually playing with the champagne glass in her hand, and said in a cool and quiet voice, "I have a clear view of my career, and I have some experience in ups and downs. But I heard." Chapter 434. Jean Wan paused and glanced at her with a faint smile. "Do you also want to enter the real estate industry?" Ji Mingran's expression faltered. She glared at Jean Wan harshly. "What do you mean by also want to enter the real estate industry? There are many real estate studios in High City, but the market demand is too high. I'm not young anymore. I should have my own things to do. Brother Sheng has only invested a sum of money for me. What? Are you afraid that my studio will grow stronger and stronger in High City and take away your business?" "I don't think so. I'm afraid it won't be so easy for you to snatch a piece of meat from my mouth." Jean Wan smiled coldly and raised her glass to her. "After all, we used to be sisters who grew up together. Since you are so confident that you want to try your luck in this industry, why don't I propose a toast to you first and wish you success, N?" Jean Wan's eyes were smiling, but the coldness and sarcasm in them made Ji Mingran's expression turn ugly. She didn't take her glass but leaned against Sheng Yihan's side. "Brother Sheng, I've greeted my acquaintance. Let's go. We have to go to the Huanhai Resort tonight. I don't know when we can sleep. Let's go rest for a while?" Sheng Yihan's gaze fell heavily on Jean Wan. Jean Wan could see that Sheng Yihan had changed a lot over the years. He was no longer the lonely and brave brother Sheng she used to be, nor was he as a famous orthopedic doctor in High City. He had been infected with the shrewdness and ambition of many businessmen, and he didn't restrain his ambition at all. But in front of Jinwan, he still restrained some of his emotions and said, "Goodbye." Jinwan didn't look at him anymore. She turned and left, not even intending to say goodbye. Seeing that Sheng Yihan's gaze was still fixed on Jinwan's back as she walked away, Ji Menggran said with a smile, "We meet again. Do you still think you must have this Jinwan? Back then you couldn't get her. Now that she's like this, I'm afraid it's even more impossible for you to get her. A woman who is too beautiful is very scary. A woman who is beautiful but has no heart is not someone anyone can resist." With that, Ji Menggran let go of his hand, but her face was still full of smiles. "Did you see that? She can even meet Mo Jingshan without batting an eyelid and pass by him emotionlessly, let alone you. What can she do to you?" Sheng Yihan glanced at her coldly. "Take your money and do your work. Don't say things you shouldn't say in front of me. Don't forget where your life was saved. In front of me, you are not qualified to tell me what to do." Ji Menggran smiled, picked up a glass of wine on the waiter's tray, and put it to her lips, hiding the flash of hatred in her eyes. It was true that she didn't board the plane that crashed and managed to keep her life. However, due to a combination of circumstances, she was forced to flee the country and mistakenly boarded a pirate ship. In the end, she was trafficked to Africa. Because she lost her freedom, she was humiliated and invaded by countless people. Even she couldn't count them all. It was only when she was emaciated and covered in wounds that Sheng Yihan found her and brought her back from that hopeless situation. Sheng Yihan hired a psychiatrist to treat her for a year before she gave up the idea of suicide. But why did Sheng Yihan save her? Ever since he followed Shin Haru into the Ji family, he had wholeheartedly liked Jinwan. This kind of feeling would not change. As for saving her, it was because of the Ji family and Jinwan. Of course there were other reasons. She knew this and he also knew her unruly thoughts. The two of them seemed to be dating on the surface, but in reality they were just taking what they needed. Not to mention sleeping in the same bed, they didn't even kiss each other. Sheng Yihan found her disgusting and she had no interest in him either. Once a person became infatuated with someone, as long as they couldn't get it, they would never forget it. Sheng Yihan treated Jinwan this way, and she treated Mo Jingshan the same way. So what if he couldn't get it? At least Jinwan couldn't get it. Ji Menggran drank the wine with a smile and gently touched the pink diamond necklace she specially wore to match her dress today. She said softly, "Brother Sheng, I'm tired. I'm going to rest for a while. I'll come to you when I'm about to leave." Sheng Yihan's eyes were cold and he didn't respond. Ji Menggran had long been used to this way of getting along with him. She smiled at him again, and when someone looked over, she leaned close to him. After saying a few more words intimately, she turned and left. Sheng Yihan didn't show much expression from beginning to end. Only after Ji Menggran had gone far away did he gradually withdraw his gaze. His cold eyes glanced at Ji Menggran's back, and his gaze was cold and thoughtful. This time the event in the convention center was very grand. Because of the long duration, some temporary resting rooms, dressing rooms and changing rooms were set up on the second floor of the hall. Jinwan toasted several glasses of champagne with many people who had worked with her or would work with her in the future. She turned around and noticed that only Shinmu was talking to the city leaders, but Mo Jingshan didn't seem to be here. With Mo Jingshan's identity, he only needed to show up on many occasions and didn't need to be present all the time. It didn't matter if he had already left, gone somewhere to rest, or had other arrangements. These were not things she could care about or be curious about. Jinwan withdrew her gaze, chatted with several representatives of various real estate companies who came to greet her, and then waved at them with a smile. "Sorry, I've drunk a lot just now. I have to go to the resting room to sober up. I've not been able to hold my liquor very well in the past few years. I've just recovered a little, but I still have to restrain myself. Otherwise, I'll easily make a fool of myself in public." Most of the people in the hall were men. Hearing her words, they didn't force her to stay. Jinwan went straight to the second floor. Someone was changing in the dressing room, so she simply pushed open the door of the ladies' dressing room. As soon as she entered, she saw Ji Menggran sitting on the sofa in front of a dressing mirror. The places where socialites and female entrepreneurs frequented were similar to the places where female stars frequented. Besides, it was such a grand occasion, so naturally, there would be 2 makeup artists waiting here to touch up any lady's makeup. Chapter 435. Jinwan glanced at the person on the sofa who appeared content. She hesitated for a moment but did not wish to cause any trouble. The moment she opened the door, she prepared to leave. However, Ji Menggran had already seen her. Her gaze had already shifted in her direction. Her eyes were filled with provocation. "Big sister, are you here to look for me?" The word "big sister" caused Jinwan's hand to pause. She calmly turned to glance at her. The others also shifted their gaze in her direction. "Miss G, is she your big sister?" one of the socialites asked curiously. This Miss G was naturally not referring to Jinwan. "Of course. My surname is G. Coincidentally, her surname is also G." Ji Minggran glanced at Jinwan. Her gaze was clearly mocking the fact that Jinwan's surname did not match her original identity. Since they had already entered the conversation, it would not be appropriate for Jinwan to leave now. She coldly glanced in their direction and walked in. Coincidentally, she only saw drinks and wine in the hall of the convention center. She didn't find any mineral water. Seeing that there was a water dispenser in the dressing room, she went over to open the cabinet below, took out a disposable paper cup, and poured herself a cup of water. "Miss G, your sister seems to be a little cold," one of the socialites spoke up again. A certain socialite spoke again. Her first impression was that Ji Minggran was a very easy person to talk to. However, this sister of hers did not even greet her after entering the door, so she instinctively thought that she was the type of person who was cold and pretentious. "Don't you know about MN Group? This year, my sister, Jinwan, climbed to the top of the Forbes list of Chinese female entrepreneurs under the age of 25. Ji Minggran looked in Jinwan's direction and spoke seriously. It wasn't easy to climb to the top of the list. She should at least put on some airs, right? Otherwise, how can she live up to her reputation as the CEO of MN Group? The socialite and the other young lady didn't know much about Jinwan, and Jinwan didn't recognize them. When the two makeup artists heard that Jinwan was the CEO of the MN Group, their indifferent expressions became slightly more restrained. The socialite and the young lady standing by Ji Minggran sneered. So what if she climbed to the top of the Forbes list? It's just like those award ceremonies in the entertainment industry. If you want to get a title, you just have to sleep with the investors a few more times. In a place like the business world where big shots gather, how hard is it to sleep to the top of the list? Ji Minggran lowered her eyes and said faintly, "That's true. My sister used to run a real estate studio in High City. Later on she moved to England. After that, she didn't have much contact with her family. I don't know which powerful person she managed to latch onto, but her company was established and her image as a strong woman in the business world was established. Even if she really did have illicit affairs with someone, I don't think she would admit to it. I'll look at what I'm saying. After all, she's my sister. How could I say such things? This kind of thing is too common in this circle. It all depends on whether you are willing to serve a man." The socialite spoke as she glanced sideways at Jinwan, who was standing there drinking water as if she did not take their words seriously. She then glanced at Ji Minggran. "Miss Ji, you have CEO Xing to support you. If you are willing to throw caution to the wind like your sister, wouldn't it be easy for you to have your own career? I'm not as willing to throw caution to the wind like her. Besides, although brother Xing takes good care of me, it's not the kind of relationship you're talking about. Our relationship is very pure. He just takes good care of me. Why are you still being so humble? You're wearing such a large pink diamond. Pink diamonds represent pure and romantic love. Since Mr. Xing is willing to give you this pink diamond necklace, it means that he has long been interested in you. You should hurry up and cherish this opportunity. Let CEO Xing help you build up your studio. This way you won't be trampled on by others," a certain socialite said as she glanced in Jinwan's direction. "That's right. This kind of pink diamond isn't cheap. Besides, it's very difficult to buy it on the market." The young lady also agreed. The other two makeup artists also looked enviously at the pink diamond necklace around Ji Minggran's neck. Then, as though out of habit, they suddenly glanced at Jinwan's neck. They saw that although Jinwan's gown was not bad, she was not wearing any jewelry. Although her collarbone was beautiful, it seemed as though something was missing. However, the makeup artist did not dare to speak carelessly. They could not afford to offend Miss G, nor could they afford to offend CEO G. They could only stand by Ji Minggran's sofa and try to get close to her. These women chatted for a long time, but Jinwan remained standing there, collecting water and drinking it. After she drank half a glass of water, she placed the paper cup down. She glanced at them and went straight to the point. "Based on your intelligence and skills, it's not easy for you to gather here. After all, the world is only so big. If you want to achieve something, you can only climb into a man's bed to think of a way." Speaking up to this point, Jinwan glanced at Ji Minggran and went straight to the point. "If you want Xing Yihan to invest more money in you, you can go show off your skills. What's the point of bragging here because you can't get it? Or, my good sister, you've been sitting here for so long. I don't think it's as simple as gathering a few mobs to support you, right? Ji Menggran was just thinking about how to get Jean Wan's experiences in England when she abruptly heard her words. Her heart was filled with anger, but her face maintained a mocking smile as she looked in her direction. Right now Jean Wan was just putting up a strong front. Back then she was protected tightly by Mo Jingshan's side, but now wasn't she still alone? Ji Menggran restrained her expression. Big sister, I know you don't want others to talk about you. Her words were vague, but it only made people speculate that Jean Wan had a dirty past. After all, it was already not easy for such a young woman to establish a foothold in the business world. It was even more so for her to be able to push MN Group into the top 10 Chinese enterprises in the world. Without waiting for Ji Menggran to finish, Jean Wan interrupted her. If you really want to know about my business history, why don't you wait until the book I wrote goes on sale next month and take a look at it in the bookstore? Chapter 436. Seeing Jean Wan's faint yet piercing smile, the women around the sofa were momentarily speechless. Their hearts were filled with complicated emotions. They did not expect that not only was Jean Wan's path to success becoming smoother, but she had even published a book. Jean Wan's indifferent and cold voice rang out once more. She curled her finger and lightly tapped on the table in front of the mirror. She went straight to the point and said, Ji Menggran, if you want to bask in this sister's glory, you have to see if you have the qualifications. You once said that I'm not related to you by blood, but now you want to use my current momentum to step on me. If you keep calling me sister, I'm afraid I won't have the fortune to lose weight. Ji Menggran raised her eyes and saw that Jean Wan's eyes were smiling, but there was not the slightest hint of a smile in them. She did not expect Jean Wan to publicly admit that she was not related to the Ji family by blood. She had always thought that Jean Wan minded this matter. She did not expect that she would actually be so calm. Ji Menggran's heart trembled slightly. It seemed that Jean Wan, who wasn't easy to deal with in the past, had developed a cold and hard heart after years of training. In the past she might have had a lot of worldly wisdom to consider, but now she really didn't care about anything. The people by the side were slightly surprised. They looked as though they wanted to hear more gossip. There was no such thing as true love in this socialite circle. Besides, these people had only met here today and were just chatting with each other. If they continued to dig deeper, not only would they be able to drag Jean Wan down, they most likely would not have a good ending. Ji Menggran returned to her senses and did not speak anymore. She raised her hand and slowly played with her hair, softly saying, Help me redo my hair. I'll be changing out of my gown in a while. I have to go to the resort later. I don't think there will be any makeup artists with me. It won't be easy to remove my hair. The two young ladies saw that Ji Menggran did not intend to speak anymore and immediately shifted their gaze to Jean Wan. Ji Menggran did not deliberately nitpick and Jean Wan did not say anything more. When Ji Menggran sat in front of the makeup mirror, Jean Wan calmly sat on the other side. Aren't there two makeup artists? I'll have to trouble one of you to help me rearrange my hair. Thank you. Jean Wan's tone was mild and calm. The two makeup artists looked at each other, and one of them, who could tell whose aura was stronger, immediately came to Jean Wan's side. She raised her hand and helped her remove the small hairpin hidden in her hairstyle, asking, COG, what do you want to do? Let's comb out the style and make it look simple. All right. Ji Menggran saw that Jean Wan was not affected by this place at all and could even calmly ask the makeup artist to do her hair as though no one else was around. Ji Menggran glanced at her in the mirror. Jean Wan did not look at her. She closed her eyes and rested. Each of them was a mirror. Although neither of them spoke, anyone with a discerning eye could tell that Ji Menggran was more or less indignant. On the other hand, Jean Wan was unperturbed despite the wind blowing in her face. Women naturally liked to be hostile to women who stood too tall or were much prettier than them. Moreover, they were better at starting fights. They could see other people fighting openly and covertly, and they could also casually join in the fun from the side. The two young ladies by the side did not rush to fix their hair. They only touched up their lipstick in front of the mirror and casually said, Miss G, the pink diamond you're wearing is the one that was sold for 88 million yuan at the Edinburgh auction at the end of last year, isn't it? At that time, many people were guessing who this pink diamond would end up in. I didn't expect it to be worn by you today. I'm so envious. Ji Menggran could tell that the two of them saw that she and Jean Wan were too quiet and wanted to talk about something. She did not mind. If it could make Jean Wan uncomfortable, she was happy to cooperate. Ji Menggran smiled as she touched the pink diamond necklace in front of her collarbone. It's just a small diamond. You've already brought it up so many times. Even I feel embarrassed hearing it. In the future, I won't dare to wear it so casually. When Brother Sheng gave this necklace to me, I didn't expect it to be so valuable. The two young ladies were still full of envy and jealousy. The smile on Ji Mingran's face grew wider. Jin Wan, on the other hand, remained quiet. She kept her eyes closed and did not participate in any conversation. After the makeup artist fixed her hair, she asked in a low voice, "Cog, you just drank and ate, right? Your lip makeup also needs to be touched up. Do you want to use our lipstick or the one you brought yourself?" Ji Yunshu didn't know what to say. "Use mine." Jin Wan pointed to her handbag on the table. The makeup artist nodded, walked over and opened Jin Wan's bag. She was about to look inside and saw a nude lipstick. Just as she was about to take it out, a blue diamond suddenly fell out and landed on the table in front of the mirror, making a soft but slightly crisp sound. Jin Wan nodded. "Jin Wan, don't worry." This sound attracted everyone's attention. The makeup artist who was holding Jin Wan's handbag rushed to apologize. I'm sorry, Cog. I didn't know you had a necklace in your bag. I'll put it away for you." However, before the makeup artist could touch the necklace, she heard a certain socialite standing by the side cry out in surprise. "This 10-carat round blue diamond?" It was only then that Jin Wan opened her eyes. She saw that the makeup artist, who was about to pick up the necklace, was so frightened that she did not even dare to touch it. The blue diamond placed in the middle of the platinum necklace was shining brightly under the light of the mirror. "Cog, I'm sorry. The makeup artist apologized profusely. "It's all right. Did you find the lipstick?" Jin Wan asked calmly. The makeup artist nodded. "I found it. This nude one, right?" Jin Wan closed her eyes again. She was not in a hurry to put the necklace away, nor did she touch her bag. As though nothing had happened, she continued to wait for the makeup artist to touch up her makeup. However, the others in the dressing room were clearly not as calm as Jin Wan. Chapter 437. The other socialite was also shocked and couldn't believe it. Really? Could it be fake? How could it be fake? Look at the blue diamond. It's not polished at all. It's a pure round diamond. Look at its purity. Based on our research on diamonds, we can tell it's real at a glance. She took a look at Jin Wan in surprise and lowered her voice to say, "This blue diamond shocked the whole world's jewelry industry. My family is in the jewelry business. At that time, my father wanted to go abroad to observe it, but he didn't even have a chance to take a look at it before it was already owned by someone. I didn't expect it to be in her hands now." Jin Wan's eyes widened in surprise as she looked at Jin Wan. The two socialites lowered their voices, but in this large dressing room with only the sound of air conditioning, their voices were particularly clear. At this moment, the two makeup artists standing behind Jin Wan and Mengran did not dare to speak carelessly. The one standing behind Jin Wan's hand was still trembling because she had accidentally touched the blue diamond earlier. Jin Wan knew the value of the blue diamond, but when Grandfather Mo handed it to her, she didn't expect it to be so valuable. She looked at the round diamond on the table that was emitting a light blue glow and somehow felt that she had underestimated it when she guessed it was worth hundreds of millions of yuan. This kind of FL-level diamond that could cause a sensation in the global jewelry industry was hard to come by even in 1,000 years. On the other side, Ji Mingran's face was so bad that it couldn't be described as ugly. While no one was paying attention, she raised her hand to pull off the pink diamond necklace around her neck and threw it into her bag. Then she glanced sideways at Jin Wan's blue diamond and was so angry that her teeth itched. Although she had never heard of this blue diamond, she could immediately guess how this diamond fell into Jin Wan's hands from the discussion of these two high-city socialites and the time they said this diamond would be introduced to the world. It was Mo Jingshan. It was the Mo family. Thinking of this, Ji Mingran clenched her bag even tighter. She thought she had learned enough forbearance in front of Xing Yihan after experiencing so many things outside, but she didn't expect that in front of Jin Wan, she would still be so unreconciled. As they left the dressing room, Ji Mingran deliberately walked by Jin Wan's side. When she brushed past her, she deliberately whispered, "You have such a valuable diamond in your bag but you don't wear it. It seems like you're too embarrassed to show it off. After all, it's a gift from your ex-husband. He's long gone and we're strangers now. How can you wear it to show off?" Jin Wan paused in her footsteps. Just as Ji Mingran thought that she had successfully touched her heart, Jin Wan blinked, her gaze full of smiles. "If you have the time to worry about me, why don't you check the origin of your pink diamond? The pink diamond that was auctioned off in Edinburgh was once an investor of mine and a gift from my teacher. It's just that a diamond with a girlish heart doesn't really suit me. I've never worn it before. Later, with my mentor's approval, I sent this pink diamond to Edinburgh for auction in the name of charity. I didn't care about what happened afterward, but I didn't expect that it would be bought by Sheng Yihan and given to you. Ji Mingran's expression didn't change, but her heart pounded fiercely. Jin Wan withdrew her gaze from her and smiled. I don't really like wearing jewelry, but it's inevitable that I'm a little impulsive when it comes to diamonds. Women always have a few diamonds they like, but the one you took out to show off is the one I don't like. This pink diamond was sent to Edinburgh in the name of MN Group's donation to the International Group of Children with Heart Disease. In fact, when my mentor gave it to me, it was only worth more than 10 million yuan. I didn't expect it to be auctioned off for 88 million yuan. It seems that I should thank you and Sheng Yihan for your generous donation on behalf of those international children with heart disease. Seeing that Ji Mingran's face was about to turn green, Jin Wan smiled again, casually flipped her hair, and turned to go downstairs with a free and easy smile. At this time, the two socialites in the dressing room coughed lightly as they walked past Ji Mingran. Because Ji Mingran stood motionless in front of the door like a statue, one of the socialites said in a low voice, "Excuse me, Miss Ji, please excuse me." Ji Mingran paused, turned her eyes sharply, and met the socialite's half-sympathetic and half-smiling eyes. The socialite looked at her fearlessly, then took the hand of the other socialite next to her and walked away with a faint smile. The two makeup artists in the dressing room were busy packing up and preparing to get off work, not daring to look at the door. Fortunately, they didn't say too much like the two socialites who deliberately stirred up trouble. No one was a fool. After all, Jin Wan was the CEO of MN Group. Even if they weren't familiar with Jin Wan, they knew the status of MN Group in the Chinese business world. Ji Mingran didn't have the awareness of smashing an egg against a rock if she wanted to show off in front of the CEO of MN Group. When Jin Wan went downstairs, she was going to leave when the event in the convention center was over. However, the organizer, the director, and the provincial leaders directly invited the distinguished guests to stay at the seaside resort for 2 nights, and there were already dozens of cars waiting outside. Everyone was here, and it seemed that no one wanted to leave, so Jin Wan didn't want to leave alone, so she got in the car with them. This so-called seaside resort was actually an outdoor entertainment venue specially prepared for the rich. It was a huge resort that stretched as far as the eye could see, so it must have invested a lot of money. The ground was covered with green lawns, and it was said that there were many fitness and entertainment venues behind the holiday villa, including huge indoor and outdoor golf courses. Everyone who came here tonight was of high status, so the accommodation here was not bad. When they arrived, it was already past 11 o'clock at night. There were no other activities at this time, so they just needed to go back to their rooms to rest. Jin Wan took the room card that had been arranged and went straight to her room. After opening the door, she checked the security facilities here before entering. Before she closed the door, she heard 2 CEOs of a certain company walking and talking in the corridor, and they seemed to be talking about Shine Group. Chapter 438. Mo Jingshan would come. As soon as this thought appeared in her mind, Jin Wan closed the door. However, the soundproofing of this room was not very good. The leaders of the city said that they could give more feedback to the higher-ups after staying here. It seemed that they needed to reflect on the soundproofing problem. Because the conversations about Mo Jingshan outside kept coming into her ears from time to time. The 2 CEOs who were talking outside just now probably lived on this floor, standing in the corridor and chatting. For example, they talked about how they could deepen their cooperation with Shine Group and how they could have more suitable contact with CEO Mo without being too awkward. They also talked about how the Mo family had always been low-key. Mo Jingshan rarely appeared on the news, and no media dared to touch the tip of the knife. The domestic search engines did not dare to easily publish information about the Mo family. Occasionally there would be a few pieces of news about Shine, but they would also be blocked. Occasionally, for the publicity of the company's cooperation projects, Mo Jingshan would give a rare positive response in front of the media, but he was rarely allowed to take photos or videos. There were too many rising companies and people in High City. Mo Jingshan's name was equivalent to a Buddha in the circle. Everyone wanted to get close to him, but few people had the courage to do so. Even if they had the courage, they might not have the ability to get close to him. After all, they were not qualified enough. In these years, there were many women who flocked to Mo Jingshan. Those who knew something about Mo Jingshan only knew that he was once married, but later divorced. Those who didn't know only thought that he was not interested in women, so he never had a woman who was too close to him. He was a very difficult person to conquer. Whether it was the beauties in High City or the managers of various companies, they all wanted to get close to Mo Jingshan, but they couldn't get close to him at all. Jinwan picked her ears inside the door and felt that it was really necessary to give feedback on this soundproofing problem tomorrow. The people outside were still chatting. From time to time, the CEOs of other companies passing by would say hello, and from time to time, there would be laughter and polite conversations. Jinwan went to the bathroom to take a shower and changed into a loose and light white t-shirt. After blowing her hair dry, she stood in front of the mirror and patted the lotion on her face. Her fingers caressed her smooth skin, and she recalled that when she was in England, Mr. Zand had once told her that beauty was a woman's best weapon. If coupled with a cold and unshakable heart, she would be invincible. She had never deliberately cared about whether she was beautiful or not. However, her heart had already lost its warmth since 3 years ago. Just like the people around her often said, Mr. Vince ran from High City to London and persisted for 3 years, but she didn't seem to be moved at all. Did she not feel anything at all? Was she not moved at all? Was his heart made of iron? Was his heart moved? Of course not. But was his heart made of iron? No, it was clearly ice. The next morning, Jinwan got up. In the past few years, she had the habit of exercising as soon as she had time in England. Even if she didn't exercise, she would run for half an hour or do some healthy yoga in her room. There was a gym in the resort. In the morning, many people greeted each other with a white towel around their necks. Some were preparing to go to the gym, and some who had woken up even earlier had already returned. When Jinwan went out, she simply said hello. There were not many people in the gym, but most of them were in good shape and good at self-management. When those people saw Jinwan, they stopped to say hello to her. Jinwan smiled and then withdrew her gaze. She went to the treadmill, pressed a few buttons, and began to focus on running without speaking. During this period, when someone came to say hello, Jinwan only turned her head and smiled politely. When the other party failed to gain any interest and turned to leave, Jinwan withdrew her gaze and continued to look at the numbers on the treadmill. Her face was expressionless. After the gym, she returned to her room to take a shower. Today was not a private social event, but a rare holiday for the big shots of the province, city, and High City to gather together. Many people came for the leaders of the province, and many came for Mo Jingshan, even though Mo Jingshan had not been here since last night. In the morning, Jinwan went to the beach to pick up seashells out of boredom. She had just picked up a small handful of white seashells and was about to take them back to her room to wash when she heard someone say that CEO Mo was coming. Jinwan was silent for a moment, went back to her room to put the seashells away, washed her hands and walked out. She happened to follow the crowd to the front gate of the resort. Seeing the car outside, she stood behind the crowd and pretended to be looking forward to it like everyone else. When Mo Jingshan got out of the car, the leaders and bosses came forward to welcome him. Although Jinwan was behind the crowd from this angle, she still saw the man approaching in this direction at a glance. In this short moment, the scene in the kitchen of Aolan International when this man rolled up his sleeves and stood by the counter to help her prepare dinner appeared in her mind. Looking at this tall and handsome man who was used to wearing a black suit and shirt, his aura was not covered by the sea of people even when he was surrounded by a crowd. No matter how she looked at it, it was impossible to connect this man with those warm and gentle times in the past. Jinwan's lips curved slightly. She didn't know why she was smiling. Mo Jingshan's expression was very indifferent. He had long been used to such a scene of people crowding and lining the road to welcome him. When he passed by some people, he would occasionally shake hands with them politely, but most of the time he just walked past them. Shenmu, as usual, raised his hand from time to time to politely stop people from approaching. When he walked to the side, Shenmu raised his hand again and was about to separate Mo Jingshan from the crowd when he saw Jinwan standing in the crowd. His hand paused and subconsciously wondered if he should ask Xiao Mo to shake hands with Jinwan. However, when Mo Jingshan's gaze landed on Jinwan's face, he had already calmly retracted it. Even though Shenmu had intentionally led the crowd in this direction, Jinwan also consciously took a step back. However, she did not expect that she would step on the skirt of the person behind her. The person behind her was probably a rich lady or a rich lady. The moment she was stepped on, she frowned in dissatisfaction. "What are you doing? Can't you be more careful?" As she spoke, the person behind her pushed Jinwan's back. Chapter 439. The moment Jinwan stumbled forward, her heart sank. She subconsciously raised her hand, wanting to use the person in front of her to steady herself. However, the moment she remembered that the person in front of her was Mo Jingshan, her hand froze in midair. However, she did not expect that the moment she was about to fall to the ground, her arm would be tightened. Before she could fall, she was supported by someone. The distance that had been maintained at an appropriate distance was instantly pulled closer. A clear and cold aura directly enveloped his face. It was strong, unfamiliar, and a little familiar that he had not felt for a long time. Jean Wan's expression, which she thought was calm, froze in an instant. The moment she raised her eyes, she met the man's gaze that was as deep as ink. The palm that was supporting her had a familiar warmth, but it also caused all the hairs on her body to stand on end. She instinctively tried to retreat. "Are you all right?" The rich woman who had pushed Jean Wan earlier did not expect things to turn out like this. Seeing that even COMO seemed to have been knocked into, she rushed over to ask with concern and regret. Jean Wan shook her head. Her voice did not reveal any emotions. "I'm fine." As she spoke, she unobtrusively pulled her arm away from Mo Jingshin's grasp. Her mouth politely and distant said, "Thank you." Mo Jingshin did not respond to her words. His gaze only swept across the unique outfit she was wearing. Everyone else was dressed fashionably, except for Jean Wan, who was wearing a loose white t-shirt and loose beach pants. Right now, the flip-flops that were hidden by the pants were revealed. In this kind of environment and among the crowd, she appeared especially careless. It was as though she was really here for a vacation. His gaze swept down again. "Can you stand properly?" "Yes." His gaze landed on her flip-flops. Her slender, white toes were still stained with fine white sand. It was obvious that she had just finished playing at the beach and had washed up before running out. She came very perfunctorily. Mo Jingshin withdrew his gaze, calmly saying, "There are too many people here. Everyone do what you need to do. Don't let any more incidents happen. Disperse." With that, Jean Wan clearly felt that Mo Jingshin glanced at her. She didn't look back at him but lowered her head to look at her toes, which were exposed outside the beach pants, and shrank them slightly. The next moment, she saw out of the corner of her eye that Mo Jingshin had turned to leave. "Cog, are you all right?" someone politely asked in concern. "I'm fine. It's my fault for not standing properly." Jean Wan smiled. Earlier she had rushed over. Only now did she realize that everyone was dressed neatly. Although they were not as formal as they were at the convention center last night, they were all either dressed in suits or looked like they were attending a meeting. She was the only one who treated herself as though she was here for a vacation. Taking advantage of the fact that the crowd's attention was not on her, she smiled politely at the people passing by and slipped back into her room. She had to stay here for one more night. Xiao Ba and Xia Tian seemed to have completely given her a holiday these 2 days. They didn't even call her. The silence on the phone made Jean Wan wonder if her phone was in arrears. The morning passed with many leaders and colleagues getting to know each other better and exchanging greetings. The atmosphere was very good. After noon, everyone began to enter the vacation mode. One of MN Group's partners, who had been working with MN Group for 2 years, found Jean Wan on the beach and said with a smile, "Cog, you're really on vacation. So many people are looking for opportunities to get close to people who stand higher up, and the young women are also flying around with smiles like butterflies. Only you came here to play in the sand and watch the sea like a heartless child. But today, a city leader mentioned you by name, saying that your MN Group is now a famous real estate company in High City and has moved its headquarters back from London. He praised you greatly and was looking for you at the scene. Who would have thought that you were playing in the sand here?" Jean Wan's hand was casually drawing on the beach for a while. Hearing this, she looked back at the man and smiled. "I'll show up when I need to, but today's occasion is more casual. It's better to keep a low profile as much as possible. In the business world, women are often unfair, and there are all kinds of rumors about successful women. In such an environment, if I show up like I did at the exhibition, I may not be able to spread any rumors. I should restrain myself." Seeing that Jean Wan didn't want to join in the fun at all, the partner, who had been working with MN Group for 2 years, knew Jean Wan well, so he said with a smile, "Do you want to play golf with me later?" "How's your golf?" "It's a so-so." "I'm not particularly good at it," Jean Wan answered with a perfunctory smile. "Bowling?" "Also very average." The man raised his eyebrows. "Then let's go and have a look together. Many famous people in High City are here. Although you're low-key, you don't seem to fit in with the crowd. It's just past noon. Let's talk about it in the evening." "I won't go to this party." The man frowned, looked around, and approached her. He squatted down behind her, leaned close, and said in a low voice, "When you were in London, you were successful in all aspects. Why are you so dull after coming back to China? High City is not as good as London." There are so many people here today and you've left a good impression on them these 2 days. If you play golf, eat and show your face, it will be much more convenient for you to do anything in China in the future. It's not like you don't know that you need connections to do business in China. These words were indeed well-intentioned for her, and Jinwan could tell. After being in the business circle for so long and dealing with the domestic business world for so long, Jinwan certainly knew that if she wanted to continue to do well in China, she had to be sensible. She smiled. I'll be there in a moment. The afternoon sun is just right now. I can't bear to leave. Aren't you afraid of getting tanned? I've put on sunscreen and I've always been the type to anger the sun. Why do you say that? I just can't get a tan. Jinwan smiled and the dimples on her lips appeared slightly. The partner chatted with her for a while more and then urged her to go to the sports center in the resort early to play with everyone. After Jinwan nodded, he got up and left. The scorching sun poured down on the beach. Many people gradually couldn't stand the heat, and the few people who were lingering on the beach also left. The long, thin white beach was empty. Chapter 440. When Jinwan entered, there were already a lot of people inside. The stadium was very large and many people were sitting on some chairs and sofas. She had seen Mo Jingshan enter the stadium before she came here. At this moment, as soon as Mo Jingshan entered the door, he was invited to sit in the front by several big bosses. Almost all the people who came to this stadium had changed their clothes, and Mo Jingshan also changed out of the suit and trousers he came in. He was tall and straight, and no matter in a suit or casual sportswear, he had an incomparable solemn and cold temperament. "Cog, I couldn't find you for a long time. Didn't you say you were sporty in the morning? We have been playing here for a long time. Why didn't you come until now?" When a boss saw Jinwan, he came over and pulled her to the other side. "I was basking in the sun on the beach. It was so comfortable that I almost fell asleep," Jinwan explained with a smile. Come on, let's play together. There are so many people here. I won't join in. I was basking in the sun for a long time. I'm afraid I'll get heat stroke, so I'll go to the rest area to sit for a while." "You look fine. Why do you have heat stroke? Come on, play a few shots and exercise." A boss forced a golf club into Jinwan's hand. Only then did Jinwan notice that it was indeed this boss who was playing. Just now, the boss was obviously about to lose and couldn't bring himself to leave. When he saw Jinwan coming, he handed the cue to her and asked her to help him continue. She guessed that since she was a woman and didn't care about losing face, she could help him finish the game, which could be regarded as saving his own face. The other people next to her whistled at Jinwan. "Cog, do you usually play golf?" "I don't play much and I don't play very well," Jinwan replied as she adjusted the club in her hand. "Really? I heard that bosses often play golf at parties and social events in London. Cog has been in the UK for 3 years. You must have played golf, right?" "Not bad. I've played golf a few times but I'm not good at it." Jinwan's expression was as usual. "Bosses, please give in to me. Otherwise, if I lose too badly and cry in public like a little girl, I'll lose face." "Haha, no, Cog is too humorous, but if we can see the beauty cry with just a few balls, our welfare is too great, haha." Jinwan smiled again and held the cue in her hand. "Then let's continue." At this time, Ji Minggran, who was sitting on the sofa in the corner, suddenly came over, took Xing Yihan's cue, walked to an empty seat next to Jinwan, and said while playing with the cue, "Sister, let's play together." The way she called her sister was sweet and intimate, as though the loss she suffered at Jinwan's hands yesterday did not exist. It was as though nothing had happened. Some of the people present knew more or less that Jinwan was Ji Hongwen's daughter, and a few people knew what Jinwan had done in High City in the past, but people who could stand firm in the business world all knew what to say and what not to say, so many things were not spread casually. Besides, Jinwan was no longer the young lady of the Ji family who could be talked about behind her back at any time. When those who didn't know the situation heard Ji Minggran call her sister, in a sweet voice, they all looked over in surprise. "Cog has a sister?" Ji Minggran smiled sweetly at the other bosses. "Yes, hello bosses. You can call me Minggran." Although Ji Minggran's appearance was far from Jinwan's, she was still very pretty. Her skin was also very fair, and she was very good at dressing up. She showed off her good points, and when she smiled, she had the capital to be seductive. The bosses all nodded and were about to say something, when they suddenly heard Jinwan say coldly, "Let's start." Ji Minggran saw that Jinwan's posture of holding the club was not particularly professional. Thinking that she could embarrass Jinwan in front of others, she firmly held the club and was ready to mock her with her golf skills. At the same time, Ji Minggran moved aside so that the people sitting in the rest area behind could see how Jin Wan made a fool of herself in public. When she came over just now, she saw that Mo Jingshan was invited by the big bosses to sit in the back seat, just 5 or 6 meters behind Jin Wan. Playing golf was also a very common form of entertainment for the upper class during their vacation time. These bosses liked it very much. More importantly, it was because playing golf could cultivate one's body and mind, and it also looked very handsome. Seeing that the other bosses had already swung their clubs, Jin Wan seemed to be adjusting her movements back and forth. Not daring to play, Ji Minggran swung her club very happily. However, because she moved too fast and used too much strength, the ball swayed back and forth on the edge of the hole and rolled back, unable to enter the hole. Ji Minggran was a little regretful at first, but then she remembered that Jin Wan didn't know how to play golf and probably didn't see which ball was hers, so she turned to Jin Wan smugly. "Sister, are you going to play or not? So many bosses are waiting for you, aren't they?" However, as soon as Ji Minggran finished speaking, Jin Wan had already hit the ball forward with the club in her hand. Because she was the last to serve, the bosses who had just finished playing all looked in this direction. It was the ball that everyone was watching. It turned out that it was not as unprofessional and average as Jin Wan said. The small white ball shot by Jin Wan rushed forward in a very stable upward arc on the lawn and accurately fell into the entrance of the hole. It went in. Perfect. Ji Minggran's hand holding the club stiffened. Not bad. COG is really too modest. You've obviously practiced, but you still asked us to give in to you. You're clearly the best player in the game. Girls nowadays can't be underestimated. You can already compete with us in the business world. You're so good at playing golf. COG, you must have played a lot of golf in London. You're really good. Jin Wan just smiled at these words. The so-called PK was to defeat the players one by one, judging the stability, speed, and other aspects of the ball to determine the winner among so many people. Chapter 441. This time, Ji Minggran didn't want to be outdone by Jin Wan again. Her serious and professional movements made people feel that maybe she could win. Although Jin Wan's performance just now was really amazing, it was probably more of a coincidence and luck. This time, Jin Wan and the other presidents served at the same time and didn't wait for the last one. Seeing that everyone was serving, Ji Minggran hurriedly followed suit. This time, the ball finally entered the hole after swaying in a circle. She was feeling proud of herself when she saw that Jin Wan's ball was still the same as before. It fell into the hole steadily and didn't touch the lawn at all. Another round of applause. Even though Ji Minggran also scored, she was completely outdone by Jin Wan's skills. But this time she had scored, so Ji Minggran wasn't eliminated. She stood in her position again and tried to block as much of the view behind her as possible. Just now, Mo Jingshan happened to see Jin Wan's posture when she played the ball. Thinking about it, she felt very regretful and could only try her best to block it. Jin Wan really didn't understand Ji Minggran's small movements. She just thought that her legs or feet were uncomfortable and didn't know why she was moving back and forth. The few bosses had been playing for a long time. Seeing that the two sisters were a bit valiant here, they did not continue to play. Instead, they stood behind and watched them play. Seeing that many people had left the arena, Jin Wan was not interested in continuing. However, Ji Minggran whispered provocatively, "Don't go. Continue. Let's see how far you can go with your luck." Ji Minggran didn't say anything. Just now, Jin Wan's posture of holding the cue was not very good. Obviously, she didn't know how to play. If it wasn't luck, what else could it be? Logically speaking, Jin Wan should ignore this kind of provocation, but seeing that the other bosses were looking at her, she thought about it and didn't say much. She picked up the cue again and continued. This time, Ji Minggran's ball circled around the hole twice before finally stopping on the grass. It did not go in. Ji Minggran was so angry that she almost threw the cue away, but Jin Wan put it down first, took the mineral water handed to her by a waiter of the resort behind her, unscrewed the cap and said deadpan, "Don't be so eager to win. All the people present are leaders and big shots of major companies. As a woman, I just need to do what I should do. Why should I compete with so many men who play golf in this kind of entertainment all year round?" That one sentence clearly explained her seemingly unprofessional actions just now. The entertainment venues in London were not as many as the ones in China. Most of the events there were light sports. People there preferred to discuss business while playing ball. Jin Wan had indeed learned a lot from Mr. Zand over the past few years, but she had never planned to show it off. Ji Minggran threw herself at the gun. Who could she blame? So many bosses had left to see the two of them. If Jin Wan didn't teach her a lesson, Ji Minggran might really think that she could show off her skills here. Ji Minggran turned around and left the stage with an ugly expression. When she went to Xing Yihan's side, she saw that Xing Yihan had been sitting there and had no intention of comforting her or helping her. She was so angry that she slammed the pole in front of him. What? You lost. Why do you vent your anger with the cue? Xing Yihan looked away from Jin Wan, who was still standing there, and turned to look at Ji Minggran's livid face. You lost. Do you want to blame the queue for not cooperating with you? How dare you taunt me? Ji Minggran glared at him unhappily. Xing Yihan smiled coldly, stroked his chin with one hand, and rubbed his fingers gently across his chin. At the same time he looked at Jin Wan, who was standing there drinking water. Jin Wan's hair was not as long as it was 3 years ago. Her shoulder-length hair was casually tied into a short ponytail, which looked simple and energetic. She was still wearing a loose beach dress, but unlike the other women present who wore colorful beach dresses that showed off their shoulders and beautiful legs, she wore a white t-shirt and loose trousers. Except for her arms and the part above her neck, all the rest of her beauty was covered by her clothes. There were many kinds of women. Jin Wan's beauty now seemed to be completely different from that of 3 years ago or when she was a teenager. Her eyes, which were sometimes low-key and sometimes flamboyant, but not at all timid, made men have a strong desire to conquer her. But she was so far away that no one could reach her. Jin Wan put down the mineral water bottle and said a few words with a smile to the other CEOs who were praising her. At this time, a minister in the rest area poured a cup of tea for Mo Jingshan with a smile and said, Now the business world is really not just the world of men. A young woman like COG is also very outstanding. Mo Jingshan calmly looked in that direction and casually picked up the teacup. He seemed to be deep in thought, but also seemed to be indifferent as he looked at the smiling woman in the crowd. Seeing that Mo Jingshan's eyes rarely stayed on a woman for so long, the minister thought he was interested in this COG, so he immediately continued the topic. It hasn't been long since I took office in High City, so I don't know much about the local affairs in High City. I heard that COG was also from High City, but I don't know which family she is from. I'm also very curious about her experience. She has achieved so much before she is 25 years old. She's really extraordinary. Seeing that Mo Jingshan just sipped the tea in the cup calmly and didn't seem to be annoyed by his words, the minister felt it was reasonable and said, Mo, have you ever met COG? After a year and a half, you will reach the age of independence. No matter how busy the Shine Group is, you should get married and have a family. How lonely it is to be single all the time. How about we find someone to introduce you to? I think COG is very good. COG knows how you feel about her. Mo Jingshan put down the teacup casually as if he didn't hear the minister's flattering words in the topic just now, and said flatly, Let's continue talking about the Ministry of Construction and the large stadium. Chapter 442. As the conversation continued, Mo Jingshan calmly sipped the tea in his cup. His gaze had already shifted away from Jin Wan. At the same time, Jin Wan turned to look at the rest area. Seeing that there were still a few empty seats, she was about to go over, when a boss next to her suddenly invited her to sit in the rest area with more empty seats. Jin Wan turned to look over and saw Mo Jingshan sitting in the middle with the minister of a certain agency. No wonder there were few people in that row. With Mo Jingshan there, many people didn't dare to get too close to him even if they wanted to. Didn't you see CEO Mo sitting there? I won't sit there. We're all strangers. It's embarrassing to sit too close to him, Jin Wan said. What's there to be embarrassed about? When CEO Mo first arrived you almost fell and CEO Mo helped you up. It's no wonder we got to know each other. Jin Wan, seeing that she couldn't refuse, although Jin Wan had thousands of ways to refuse in this situation, she still had to stay in High City, and she couldn't do as she pleased. When she sat down with the other CEOs, the minister who was talking to Mo Jingshan suddenly took a meaningful look at Jin Wan and smiled at her. COG, you were really valiant and handsome when you played golf just now. Minister, you flatter me. How many girls here can be as beautiful and talented as you? The director looked at her with a smile and began to introduce politely, This is President Mo. You should know him, right? Jin Wan calmly turned to look at Mo Jingshan, who was only a sofa away from her, and smiled at him. Mo, how could I not know your name? Mo Jingshan also took a look at her. His eyes were indifferent and emotionless, but his ink-black eyes were darker than the stars in the night sky. Those who had dealt with Mo Jingshan knew that he rarely paid attention to people he didn't know, and he didn't show much affection to strange women, even if the other party was a manager of a company. The people who had just invited Jin Wan began to worry about her. COG, who had just returned to China, was too young. They didn't know if she could get used to Mo Jingshan's cold treatment. However, when Mo Jingshan's eyes fell on her face, he didn't show any unfamiliarity or rejection of women as he used to. Instead, he smiled meaningfully. Although his smile was hard to read, at least in recent years, Jin Wan was the first woman Mo Jingshan didn't ignore coldly. Among them, there was a CEO who knew that the Mo family and the Ji family had been connected by marriage. Although he didn't dare to say anything, seeing Jin Wan's deliberately strange tone and CEO Mo's ambiguous smile, he couldn't help saying, COG and CEO Mo don't just know each other. As soon as she said this, the people around her all looked at Jin Wan in surprise. Mo Jingshan was not affected by her words but still looked at Jin Wan. His eyes made it hard to guess whether he was going to take advantage of the situation to expose their relationship or simply treat them as strangers like Jin Wan. Looking into Mo Jingshan's eyes, Jin Wan calmly smiled, casually played with an empty teacup on the table and said flatly, "That's true. Although it's rare to see a big shot like CEO Mo, we've all met in High City. Back then, when our company was just a studio, we had some interactions in High City, but we didn't have many interactions. I guess CEO Mo is so busy that he has long forgotten such a small figure like me." A minister immediately echoed with a smile, "COG is so beautiful that no man can forget her. No matter how busy CEO Mo is, he must have some impression of COG. Don't you think so, CEO Mo?" Mo Jingshan didn't respond but glanced at Jin Wan. Jin Wan kept smiling calmly as if she was meeting a big shot. She was sensible and well-spoken. Finally, the smile on Mo Jingshan's lips deepened, and his tone seemed to be controlling something. It was as though he could easily control someone's lifeline, causing their breathing rate to slow down. He unhurriedly and heavily said, "COG." It was just a short word. He seemed to be playing with the word, questioning something and admitting something. His indifferent eyes and incomprehensible tone made it hard for people to figure out CEO Mo's real thoughts. However, since he called Jin Wan COG, there must be something special about Jin Wan. Otherwise, given Mo Jingshan's temperament, he wouldn't even look at her at this moment. Someone who almost spilled the beans in the back didn't know what was going on between the two of them. However, seeing Jin Wan and Mo Jingshan acting like strangers, he thought he'd better not talk too much, so he just kept quiet and quietly changed his seat to avoid getting himself into trouble. Jin Wan put down the empty teacup in her hand and said indifferently, "CEO Mo?" The people around were all confused. There was a smile on Jin Wan's face but her eyes were shallow. In the past 3 years, Mo Jingshan had become more taciturn and indifferent, but Jin Wan had become open-minded and casual. After all, before returning to High City, she had thought that High City would not be as peaceful as London, but since she had decided to come back, there was no need to be afraid. Just like now, whether the past was to be uncovered or hidden, at worst she would just bury it. No matter what happened, she would accept it calmly. Mo Jingshan looked at her indifferent and even smiling eyes, and after a while he said in a tone as polite and alienated as her. Obviously, he respected the path she had chosen and said flatteringly, "You play well." Jin Wan's smile was dimpled and her eyes were glistening. Her voice seemed to contain a bit of flattery to him, but it was precisely because of this flattery that the distance between them seemed to widen. "Thank you for your praise, CEO Mo. I'm afraid my half-baked playing style is nothing in front of you, CEO Mo." Mo Jingshan raised his eyebrows calmly, and at this time, someone took the opportunity to invite Mo Jingshan to play a few rounds with them. However, Mo Jingshan just sat there quietly and showed no intention of getting up. "Go ahead. I haven't finished this pot of tea yet, and I'm not in the mood to play for the time being." Mo Jingshan looked solemn and indifferent, and his eyes had moved away from Jin Wan and didn't look at her again. Chapter 443. Jin Wan successfully got away from Mo Jingshan's side. Ignoring other people's greetings or coaxing, she directly walked away from the rest area. However, there was a group of people playing bowling on the other side. Jin Wan seemed to have taken a break and someone came to pull her over. Ji Minggran was also there, chatting and laughing with others. She held a bowling ball in her hand and seemed to be about to play. The person who pulled Jin Wan over asked her how she was playing bowling. Jin Wan still said that she was average. In the end, after playing a few rounds, Ji Minggran's initial arrogance and smugness turned into an ugly expression as she watched Jin Wan score higher than her every time. Although Jin Wan wasn't at the professional level where she could knock down all the bowling balls with a single ball, she could be considered to be the best among everyone here. She completely suppressed Ji Mingran's performance, which was like a complete novice's. There were a lot of entertainment in the afternoon. There was no one on the beach at this time, so everyone found a volleyball net and played beach volleyball. Ji Mingran refused to admit defeat and asked Jinwan to play beach volleyball with her. When someone asked Jinwan how she was playing, Jinwan smiled. Average. Hearing her response again, everyone basically didn't take it seriously. This time there was no PK. Most of the people who went to the beach to watch the wonderful performance of the Ji sisters. Of course, every time the joke was on Ji Mingran. Jinwan didn't really show weakness at all. As a woman, she was already very successful in her career, and this year was a fruitful year. Coupled with Jinwan's beauty, many men in the same industry were on Jinwan's side. They saw that Jinwan could handle almost everything clearly, kept a low profile and excelled in every aspect. In just one day many men had fallen for her, and they all hoped to see more of her brilliant side. Jinwan's eyes lit up and her eyes lit up. On the beach it was almost evening. In the afterglow of the setting sun, Jinwan was still wearing the same clothes. She casually rubbed her wrist and looked at Ji Mingran, who was on the volleyball net. In order to perform well this time, Ji Mingran specially changed into tight sportswear for convenience. However, as soon as Ji Mingran served the ball, Jinwan easily raised her hand and slapped the ball back. Her movement was fierce and fast, not giving her any face at all. Ji Mingran jumped very high but failed to catch the ball. In the midst of laughter and sighs, she angrily turned to pick up the ball. When she was about to serve, she slapped the ball hard in Ji Mingran's direction. Jinwan gave a cold smile and dodged. Ji Mingran's game of pure entertainment in the resort was ruthlessly played by Ji Mingran. It just so happened that Jinwan didn't intend to be too polite to her. On such an occasion, there was no winner or loser, and there was no professional nature to it. She let the ball roll to her feet, then picked it up with the tip of her foot, threw the ball up, and slapped it at Ji Mingran's face with the beach sand. Ji Mingran had wanted to go up to catch the ball, but the ball came directly to her face. She wanted to dodge but failed. She had just shrunk her neck and turned her face away, but the ball still hit her hard on the head and she fell to the ground in an instant. Although the volleyball hit people hard, it didn't hurt them. The sand was soft and didn't hurt them. However, Jinwan didn't show any mercy. Jinwan was still stunned by the ball and fell to the ground for more than 10 seconds before she slowly got up. The sighs of the onlookers were more obvious. They thought Ji Mingran would perform well when she went up to the court so confidently, but she still made a fool of herself. No one was stupid. Initially they did not see through this struggle between the sisters. However, Ji Mingran kept finding trouble with Jinwan and provoking her again and again. Anyone with eyes could tell that Ji Mingran was just unwilling to accept defeat and kept trying to make her presence known. Jinwan's eyes were filled with dissatisfaction and anger. Obviously she was inferior to Jinwan in every aspect, but she still wanted to compete with her. The two sisters' temperaments were really different. Forget it, Mr. Ji, don't fight. The tide is about to rise. The people on the beach should withdraw. There's really nothing to see. It's boring. Let's go. Jinwan didn't intend to stay here for long. She glanced at Ji Mingran, who had just got up from the ground, and under Ji Mingran's angry red eyes, she turned around and walked away with the crowd. When she returned to the gym, many people had gone back to their rooms to rest. There were not as many people in the gym as a few hours ago. Jinwan wondered if she should go back to her room to rest. Anyway, she could leave after one more night. She just needed to write some feedback and suggestions about the resort in the name of MN Group. She didn't need to waste too much time here. However, Sheng Yihan had just gone to the beach and brought back Ji Mingran, who looked terrible. Even if he didn't agree with Ji Mingran's troublemaking temper, Ji Mingran lost face here, which was equal to losing face for him and the Sheng family. COG. Sheng Yihan asked Ji Mingran to wipe her sweat and drink some water. A moment later he suddenly stopped Jinwan, who was about to leave the gym. Jinwan stopped and looked at the man in front of her. Before he spoke, she had guessed why he stopped her. Today Ji Mingran had made a fool of herself here again and again. Many people could see that Ji Mingran was brought here by Sheng Yihan. Even if he didn't take it seriously, he would feel embarrassed now. Jinwan didn't speak, but her eyes were cold. Sheng Yihan smiled at her and said in a voice that only she could hear, "It seems that you have learned a lot in London in the past 3 years and learned a lot in the business world and social circles in the UK. Mingran doesn't know how to appreciate your kindness and tries to provoke you. She is indeed immature, but Mingran is brought here by me this time. I can't let her be humiliated by you again and again. Don't you think so?" Jinwan glanced at him. So, what's your plan, CEO Sheng? I've been in this gym all afternoon. No matter how strong my body is, I should be tired. I can't let you two play a game of attrition with me, can you? Do you want to play golf with me again? I'm sorry, I'm not an athlete. Today, this is just an entertainment venue in a resort. Golf is just a relaxing activity. I have no interest in playing this kind of thing with you again and again. Chapter 444. The man standing opposite looked at her with dark eyes and didn't intend to let her leave so easily. Jin Wan narrowed her eyes and didn't look up. No wonder you two can be together. Birds of a feather flock together. You two are definitely the scum of the scum. Sheng Yihan didn't get angry at her sarcasm at all. He just said, "Do you know how to play darts?" Jin Wan smiled. "Are you kidding me? Didn't darts originate from England like golf? I've learned countless things in London in the past few years. Are you really going to let Ji Menggran continue to lose face here? She wants to play, but it doesn't mean I'm in the mood to play with her. It's not Menggran who wants to play with you. I'll play with you." After saying that, Sheng Yihan walked directly to her side, as if he didn't intend to ask for her consent and had already decided on this game. Jin Wan thought for a moment and turned to see that there was indeed an area for playing darts on the other side of the stadium. There was a row of international darts on the wall, both near and far. But Jin Wan didn't play darts much. It was not difficult to hit the darts accurately, but it was very difficult to aim at the center. Moreover, this kind of sport was usually the type that men liked to play. Women rarely touched it. Sheng Yihan was probably really good at it. He was a person who did things quickly and accurately. If he could suddenly stand in front of her and challenge her, he would definitely not be any worse than her. Did he want to win back some face even if he wanted to shamelessly play with her? Ji Menggran saw that Jin Wan accepted the challenge and Sheng Yihan was playing with the darts in his hand. She suddenly walked over quickly and leaned over to Sheng Yihan. "Brother Sheng, let's play with my sister, okay? You teach me and I'll play with my sister." With that, Ji Menggran stood in front of Sheng Yihan. There was no special emotion in Sheng Yihan's eyes. When he saw Ji Menggran come over again, there was finally a flash of disgust in his eyes. He saw Jin Wan playing with those darts and didn't seem to be afraid, but from what he knew of Jin Wan, he knew she was really not good at it. Then Ji Menggran insisted that he hold her hand to shoot the dart. It was obvious that Ji Menggran wanted to show off her love in front of others and save some face. After thinking for a moment, Sheng Yihan put the dart in Ji Menggran's hand, stood behind her, held her shoulders and hands and taught her how to play the dart. "Shall we start?" Sheng Yihan turned to Jin Wan who didn't seem ready and asked. Jin Wan picked up a dart at the same time and didn't even look at him. She stood where she was looking for an angle and answered coldly, "Suit yourself." She didn't want to come over, but there were so many onlookers here today. Even if she was going to lose, she couldn't have stage fright. Besides, Ji Menggran had made such a big scene, and Jin Wan couldn't just leave like that. As soon as Jin Wan finished speaking, Sheng Yihan held Ji Menggran's hand and threw the dart forward. It could be seen that he was indeed a veteran, and he did live up to Jin Wan's evaluation of him as fast, fierce, and accurate. He shot the dart forward at a very precise angle, but in the end, because Ji Menggran's hand was between his hand and the dart, and because of Ji Menggran's imperfect coordination, when the dart hit the dart board, it was still a little bit away from the center of the dart board, which was equivalent to the position of 9 rings. It was a very good result for him to play darts with a novice. Occasionally there were sparse applause around, but more people sighed disapprovingly. Not to mention how shrewd and cunning Sheng Yihan was in the business world, he was also a man of few words but couldn't be easily provoked. It was rare to see him with a female companion here, and it turned out to be COG's sister. Ji Menggran provoked COG in every way, and now even Sheng Yihan, who was usually calm and collected, was supporting her sister. Many men couldn't bear to watch such a cooperation between a man and a woman, and they couldn't wait to help Jin Wan shoot this dart. This kind of event, which was not very suitable for women, was making things difficult for her. If Jin Wan showed any expression of needing help, there would definitely be men who couldn't bear to watch it and went to help her, but Jin Wan didn't look helpless, nor did she have stage fright, so the men who had seen all kinds of wonderful performances this afternoon didn't dare to go up, lest they would be redundant if she really knew how to play darts. Great! After shooting a dart, Ji Menggran leaned in Sheng Yihan's arms excitedly. "Brother Sheng, can we shoot the middle ring?" Sheng Yihan didn't look at her but turned to look at Jin Wan, saying, "Let's talk about it after she shoots it." Ji Menggran also turned to look at Jin Wan, raising her eyebrows and waiting for her to make a fool of herself. Jin Wan ignored them, holding the dart and looking at the dartboard in front of her. She had learned a lot from Feng Ling. Although she had only learned shooting from Feng Ling for a few hours, she didn't feel too dizzy with this kind of dartboard, but she was really not very good at shooting. Finally, Jin Wan threw the dart. There was no miracle in this kind of thing. After all, she was really not good at it. The dart hit the fifth ring. Although it was very stable, it was 4 rings away from the center, which was enough to show that she was really not good at shooting. Ji Minggran took the opportunity to say excitedly, "Brother Sheng, it's our turn." At this moment, the winner had been decided. Sheng Yihan just wanted to dampen Jin Wan's spirit and didn't intend to continue. But at this time, Ji Minggran had picked up the dart, grabbed his hand and insisted on shooting again. Jin Wan still stood calmly by the side, not showing any expression of chagrin or shame because of the failure just now. It was fine to play with this thing. For a novice like her, there was no difference between winning in 1 round and winning 2 out of 3 rounds. But Ji Minggran insisted on continuing, and Sheng Yihan couldn't refuse her in public. He just took a look at Jin Wan, held Ji Minggran's hand and shot the dart forward. This time, Ji Minggran didn't follow and let Sheng Yihan do the work, so the dart hit the middle of the ring. It was a very perfect dart. At this time, the applause was relatively warm, and there were many boos in the crowd. This dart hit, and Sheng Yihan took a step back and didn't continue to hold her, but Ji Minggran felt very proud and turned to look at Jin Wan. Seeing Jin Wan pick up another dart, Sheng Yihan watched her movements and asked, "Do you need my help, Xiaoji?" Chapter 445. At this time, the crowd also raised their voices, most of them asking Jin Wan if she needed help. Jin Wan didn't answer. For some reason, the crowd behind her suddenly quietened down. At the same time, she sensed the change in Sheng Yihan and Ji Minggran's expressions. Jin Wan paused. Before she could react, she suddenly sensed that someone was approaching from behind. When the person behind her approached her, he directly held her shoulders. At the same time, a familiar yet strange scent lingered around her. Jin Wan stiffened, but the man's hand had already reached over from behind, holding her wrist and helping her to adjust her angle. His clear, low voice suddenly rang by her ear, "Don't be nervous." She didn't need to look back. She knew this person was Mo Jingshan. Even though 3 years seemed to be as far as the Milky Way between the two of them, as long as he got close, his scent, his aura, and his voice were enough for her to recognize who he was without even turning her head. Seeing Mo Jingshan, who had been sitting quietly in the rest area, come over and help Jin Wan, Ji Minggran clenched her teeth hard and clenched the dart so hard that her fingers turned white. Jin Wan wasn't nervous, but Mo Jingshan's breath suddenly surrounded her, and there were so many people who dared to speak carelessly and looked at them quietly. Her whole body tensed up. Mo Jingshan's hand touched her waist from behind. As Jin Wan's body stiffened, he corrected her standing posture. At the same time, as if he was simply teaching her how to play darts, he raised his hand and put it on her neck to help her adjust the direction of her head and the direction of her field of vision. His other hand, which had been holding her wrist, moved up and his broad, warm palm held her whole hand. "Look at the dot in front. You don't need to twist your body so hard. You can't play darts with just strength. In addition to accuracy, you also need to calm down." The man's voice was almost close to her ear. He held her hand and calmly asked, "Are you ready?" Jin Wan looked at the dart again. "Yes." The man held her hand and threw the dart. They were both carrying a newbie, but a colorful dart was shot directly at the same central ring. Not only did it hit the center, but it also knocked down Sheng Yihan and Ji Minggran's dart. It was a complete one-sided victory. The applause was thunderous. Jin Wan ignored Ji Minggran's livid face and the curious eyes of the crowd. She just looked at the ring in the center in the distance. It was as if time had returned to 3 years ago in the 11 base in Los Angeles. When she was not confident in the bullseye 100 meters away, this man had stood behind her and taught her like this. Jin Wan's eyes were calm as if the past had never existed. "Thank you, Xiao." Jin Wan looked at the dart that was stuck in her heart and abruptly withdrew her hand from the man's palm. She stood in his arms and said calmly and even coldly, "Can you let me go now?" The man behind her was not in a hurry to leave when she didn't speak. However, the moment she finished speaking, he didn't hesitate to hug her and withdrew his arm. When Jin Wan turned to thank him, the distance between them had increased by half a meter. "Thank you." Jin Wan thanked him again. Mo Jingshan saw the alienation and obvious distance in her eyes and didn't answer. When Jin Wan walked away expressionlessly, he looked indifferently at the colorful dart in the center of the ring. Jin Wan walked quickly. She was the one who was pushed away by Mo Jingshan. Since he had repeatedly said that he was dead, she naturally chose to accept this cruelest reason. She didn't ask, didn't try to persuade him, and didn't need to fight for him. After returning to High City, she didn't want to have more contact with Mo Jingshan. Perhaps it was not easy for them to meet again. Although she didn't hate this high and mighty Mo Jingshan, he had nothing to do with her anymore. After signing the divorce papers, she didn't plan to see him again. Even if the Yew Garden was smashed, the Yew Garden was sealed, and even if she went to England, she didn't expect to talk to him at such a close distance. Jin Wan went straight back to her room. When she entered the room, she found that she was sweating all over. She had been basking in the sun for so long in the morning and had been playing this and that in the afternoon. After so many exercises, she guessed that she didn't smell so good when she was playing darts. Then she thought of the scene just now, the uproar of the people around when they saw Mo Jingshan holding her to help her, and Mo Jingshan's calm and indifferent eyes from beginning to end. Reuniting after a long time might be exciting, but Jin Wan didn't want to mention it. Jin Wan entered the bathroom and stood under the water to take a bath. The water was warm. Since 3 years ago, when she almost lost her life in the air conditioning in cold water because of a high fever in that hotel, she had almost never taken a cold bath again. She rarely touched cold water, and no matter how hot the weather was, she would never take a sip of cold water. Because of this, her body was much better. Now when she occasionally had her period, she didn't have that kind of sharp pain in her belly. After the bath, it was already 7:30. It was summer and the sky had just darkened, but it was not completely dark yet. The resort was still very lively. In recent years, many of these successful people in High City were very young, unlike the scene she was familiar with in the past where there were all kinds of 45-year-old uncles with beer bellies all over the world. Some people were barbecuing in the area on the beach where barbecue was allowed. Many people were drinking and chatting and it was very lively. Jin Wan's room was on the second floor of the holiday villa, which had a huge balcony. She opened the window and walked to the balcony, enjoying the distant sea breeze and watching the group of people barbecuing. They were all friendly faces. Sheng Yihan, Ji Menggran and of course Mo Jingshan were not here. The stars gradually appeared on the horizon. Jin Wan sat on the balcony and looked at the night sky, listening to the noisy group of people below. Chapter 446. Seeing Jin Wan sitting on the balcony from a distance, Shenmu smiled, raised the kebab in his hand, greeted Jin Wan, and motioned for her to come down and eat with them. Jin Wan waved her hand with a smile, and Shenmu continued to wave at her and even said something to the people around him. Then the group of people who were barbecuing all waved at Jin Wan and kept asking her to come down and eat with them. Jin Wan wanted to say that she had just taken a shower and that she would smell of barbecue if she went down to eat barbecue, but everyone was so enthusiastic. She had just returned to China and needed to socialize with others. She couldn't be too unsociable or unsociable, so after thinking for a while, she turned around, took a thin coat and went out. It was hot, but the sea breeze at night was still a bit chilly. As soon as Jin Wan went over, she was stuffed with a handful of barbecued kebabs. After saying hello to everyone, Jin Wan sat on a bench and chatted with the passers-by from time to time. Shenmu leaned over, sat beside Jin Wan, and gave her a newly opened can of beer. "Do you want some?" "I rarely drink cold beer in recent years." Shenmu nodded and didn't insist. He took the wine back and took a sip. Then, as he ate the meat skewers, he looked at the endless sea in the dark night and said faintly, "Time really flies. In the blink of an eye, 3 years have passed just like that. I really didn't expect Mo." He paused. "I really didn't expect COG to have changed so much. The last time we met on the plane back home, I thought that everything seemed to have returned to 3 years ago and nothing had changed. But now I have to admit that you are really different from before." He paused just now because he habitually wanted to call Jin Wan Mrs. Mo, but then he suddenly realized it and called her COG. Jin Wan didn't seem to hear the change in his tone. She just smiled and handed him a handful of kebabs. "I can't eat so much. Help me eat." Shenmu smiled and took it, but he didn't eat it. Instead, he put it on a clean white oil paper beside the bench, and then he sat closer to Jin Wan while drinking. Jin Wan didn't avoid it. Anyway, she and Shenmu were old acquaintances and he knew what to do. Shenmu leaned close and said in a voice that only she could hear, "Are you really not going to have anything to do with Xiaomo?" She opened it and clinked glasses with Shenmu. After taking a sip, she calmly said, "I've already eaten tonight. I can't eat much right now, so I'll just sit here for a while. Do you need me to drink a few more cans with you?" Shenmu nodded and said, "I've already eaten tonight. I can't eat much right now." Shenmu raised his beer and clinked it with hers. Seeing that Jin Wan's attitude was so resolute and that she did not even intend to continue this topic, he did not say anything more. After the two finished a can of beer, Jin Wan no longer drank or ate. She sat there, enjoying the sea breeze and watching the lively crowd by the barbecue. Now hai ji mu of nua he ji and a ji. A mu shin a and wan ji ji he. On her way back, a young man happened to pass by her. The two walked to the holiday villa in that direction, chatting casually as they walked. As they approached the villa, Jin Wan accidentally stepped on a pebble that had rolled over from who knew where and almost fell again. The person by her side reached out to support her. Jin Wan smiled, thanked him and pulled her hand out of his grasp. Just like this they exchanged a few polite words. The man's palm seemed to still feel the touch of the white, soft wrist he had just held. Seeing Jin Wan's bright smile under the lights of the holiday night, he suddenly asked, "Although it's a little impolite to discuss a woman's age, Cog, you're at the marriageable age now, aren't you?" Jin Wan's expression didn't change. "Really? Nowadays, many women don't plan to get married after the age of 30. How old am I? How can I be considered marriageable?" I haven't heard that Cog has a boyfriend. I don't know if Cog has been keeping a low profile, so you haven't made your relationship public, or are you still single?" Jin Wan raised her hand with a smile and shook her fingers gently, meaning to keep it a secret. I can't say. Do you really have a man you like? Is he not in the business circle, so it's inconvenient to introduce him?" Jin Wan still had a mysterious smile on her face, successfully stopping the man from saying that he wanted to pursue her. Knowing that she might not be single, the man couldn't say anything more but politely and regretfully said some blessings. After sending Jin Wan to the door of the villa, he said goodbye and turned to go to the nearest holiday villa. Seeing the man leave, Jin Wan raised her eyebrows, took off the thin coat stained with the sea breeze, held it in her hand, and turned to walk into the villa with a relaxed look. However, as soon as she walked to the door, she saw a figure standing there. She paused, and the moment she raised her eyes, they met Mo Jingshan's gaze. She was met with a pair of dark eyes that were both familiar and strange at the same time. Jin Wan froze. When she walked over, she didn't notice that Mo Jingshan was here. There were many villas in this resort, and there were many people living in each villa. She really didn't know which one Mo Jingshan lived in. After all, he didn't stay here last night. Although she saw Shin Mu tonight, she instinctively thought that Mo Jingshan had left. But he was just standing there. It was obvious that he had overheard the conversation between her and the man as they walked. Jin Wan paused for a moment and then came back to herself. She thought he was just passing by and happened to meet him. She nodded politely and indifferently to him, but she didn't call him Mo, nor did she call him by his name. Mo Jingshan just stood there and didn't move because of her nod. Jin Wan caught a glimpse of a cigarette between his fingers. Although it had been lit, he was not in a hurry to smoke. There was white smoke swirling in front of him, and the man looked at her through the smoke, his eyes clear. In Jin Wan's impression, Mo Jingshan smoked, but he seldom smoked, or she had never seen him smoke after being with him for so long. She didn't expect that he would carry a cigarette with him now. Chapter 447. In the past, she had rarely smelled the scent of tobacco on Mo Jingshan's body. The smell of tobacco was not bad on a clean and clear man. In the business circle, smoking and drinking were common, not to mention a man like Mo Jingshan. He didn't need to be persuaded to drink or smoke. As long as he didn't want to touch, no one could force him to touch. But now he actually carried a cigarette with him. Jin Wan also raised her eyes in the smoke and saw him standing there, looking at her indifferently as if looking at someone who had nothing to do with him. But if she really had nothing to do with him, he probably wouldn't even bother to look at her. His dark gaze seemed to be because of what Jin Wan and the man had just talked about, such as whether she was single or in a relationship. In order to avoid being pestered, she habitually didn't deny it, but she didn't expect there would be a third person here. Looking at the man's dark eyes, Jin Wan thought for a while and looked away. She didn't feel it was necessary to explain anything and walked past him. However, the moment she walked past him, her arm was suddenly held. She paused and turned to see that Mo Jingshan was still standing there, but he suddenly held her hand. Feeling the warmth of his palm, Jin Wan didn't struggle but turned her eyes to him. Mo, please be careful. Please let go of me. Mo Jingshan also looked at her. There was no extra attitude in his eyes. He just looked at her expressionless face under the light and said coldly, "Did you go to have barbecue just now?" Jin Wan did not answer. Instead, she abruptly pulled her hand back, but the man was still holding on to her. He did not need to exert any strength, but he was still unable to release her. She saw that in his other hand, the end of the cigarette between his fingers was flickering. Only a small amount of smoke lingered in front of his elegant and deep eyes. The man casually threw the cigarette butt into the special trash can in the smoking area not far away. He didn't show any eagerness because of Jinwan's silence but still said indifferently, "It's not good to eat barbecue so late. Go ask the staff for some digestive tablets." "Thank you, COMO. I didn't eat much. I just went to sit for a while." His tone was ordinary, neither cold nor warm, but Jinwan clearly kept her distance from him. She did not give in at all, and her tone was exceptionally strange. Hearing her words, Mo Jingshan just glanced at her indifferently. At this time, some people happened to come out of the villa opposite. They turned out to be two leaders from the province and the city, who seemed to be looking for Mo Jingshan. The two leaders said, "I'm really sorry. Mo, we asked you to come here for a chat, but we made you wait for so long." It turned out that Mo Jingshan had arranged to meet these two leaders here. No wonder he was standing here at this time. Mo Jingshan looked back at the provincial leader and let go of Jinwan's arm. When the municipal leader saw Jinwan, he just nodded politely to her as a greeting and then stood by Mo Jingshan's side and whispered something. Mo Jingshan nodded and talked with the provincial leader who came over. He didn't look at her again. At this time the people standing at the door were all big leaders. Jinwan smiled at them. From her point of view, she could only see Mo Jingshan smile when he talked to the two people next to him, looking noble and elegant. She had wanted to go back to her room to rest, but there was nothing for her to do here, so she simply turned and went upstairs, quickly disappearing from their sight. The next morning the activities in the resort were over. Many people had to catch early flights so they left very early. Jinwan didn't get up late, but it was already 7:30 in the morning when she packed up and was ready to leave. When she attended the exhibition, she parked her car in the parking lot near the exhibition center. Later she came here in a car sent by the resort. Her car was not here, and this seaside resort had not been open to the public. There were newly built roads nearby and there were no cars passing by. The road was very empty. When Jinwan went to sleep last night, she forgot that there was no car nearby. She should have called someone from the exhibition center to drive her car here, or asked Xiaoba to drive her car here in advance. But now it was too late to call someone. Jinwan looked around the gate of the resort for a while, holding a small bag in her hand, walking slowly on the empty flat asphalt road, preparing to cross this road to see if she could get a taxi. At the same time she was looking for the number on her cell phone, thinking that if there was no taxi she should ask Xiaoba to help her call one. At this time the sound of a car engine suddenly came from behind. Jinwan subconsciously looked back. It was a black Bugatti, tall and spacious, which was particularly eye-catching on the empty asphalt road. She looked at the empty road nearby, and then at the approaching car behind her. The black Bugatti came closer and stopped next to her. Jinwan was puzzled and turned her head, only to see the window of the driver's seat rolled down. The driver was Shinmu. The moment she saw Shinmu, she instinctively glanced in the direction of the back door of the car. "COG." Shinmu smiled at her. "Didn't you drive here?" "The car is in the exhibition center. I forgot to ask someone to drive it here for me." The road in this seaside resort is newly built, and cars outside haven't been allowed to pass. It will take at least 30 or 40 minutes for you to walk to a place where you can get a taxi. The weather is so hot, and it's more than 30 degrees early in the morning. How can you walk there on foot? Won't you get heat stroke? It's all right. Jinwan gently raised the cell phone in her hand. "I can call someone to pick me up. It'll take a long time to get a taxi. Where do you live now, or do you want to go directly to the MN Group building in High City? Get in the car. I'll send you back." "No," Jinwan refused with a smile. "Go back quickly. Thank you." She was talking about them. Although this car was driven by Shinmu, Shinmu lived here with Mo Jingshan last night. At this time he naturally couldn't leave alone, so Mo Jingshan must be in the car. Seeing that Jinwan had no intention of getting in the car, Shinmu said again, "It's on the way from here to the city. It'll be a waste of time if you call a taxi here." "It's all right. I ate too much in the morning so I can walk on the road. Anyway, there are no cars on this road. It's very safe." Shinmu. At this time, the window of the back door of the black Bugatti rolled down, revealing Mo Jingshan's cold face. Chapter 448. At 8:30 in the morning, Jinwan returned to the MN Group. She came back in Mo Jingshan's car. During the hour in the car, except for Shinmu who asked her if she was tired walking on the asphalt road in high heels, and Jinwan answered him casually, the car was silent. When they arrived at the office building of the MN Group in the west of the city, Jinwan thanked him and got out of the car. Fearing that Xiaoba and Xia Tian would find out whose car she had taken, she got out of the car quickly and decisively. Seeing Jinwan's speed when she entered the company, Shinmu wondered if she was being chased by a ghost. How could she walk so fast? As soon as she returned to the office, Xia Tian's voice came from outside the door, and she began to mutter, "Didn't you say you would only stay in the resort for 1 day after the exhibition? Why did you stay there for 2 days? If I had known it would be so long, I would have prepared 2 more sets of clothes for you. Did you only bring 1 set of clothes? Did you hang around with those big shots in the resort for 2 days without wearing any clothes?" Jinwan went to the break room to change her clothes, and when she came out she said, "A vacation is a vacation. I just chatted casually. It doesn't matter what I wear. There are beach clothes in the store so I bought one." Xia Tian frowned. "Then did you drive back by yourself?" Jinwan didn't answer. She sat down at her desk to rest for a while, then raised her hand to pick up her bag and was about to take out her cell phone, when her fingers touched the cold blue diamond in her bag. She remembered that when she was in the car she almost took out the blue diamond and gave it back to Mo Jingshan. But in the end she held back. At that time it was quiet in the car. Mo Jingshan had been looking at the company documents in the car and didn't mean to talk to her. It seemed that he just sent her back as a favor. Although the atmosphere was too quiet, it resolved the awkwardness of being in the same close space with him. She didn't want to break the peaceful atmosphere. Once the blue diamond started a topic it would not be so smooth on the way back. Besides, Shinmu was in the car. Jinwan couldn't just return the blue diamond to him. In the end she endured this impulse all the way. When she came back, looking at the blue diamond, Jinwan raised her hand to rub her forehead and sighed. Seeing Jinwan's silence, Xia Tian's gaze fell on her bag. "That day when I helped you put on the necklace, I was in a hurry and didn't have time to ask you where this blue diamond came from. I've never seen you wear it before. Could it be that you've always left it at home? It couldn't have been a gift from someone in England, could it?" Jinwan put the bag aside. "I received this before the divorce. Who do you think sent it?" Hearing this, Xia Tian's eyes immediately lit up. She moved closer to the desk and asked, "Who did you meet at the exhibition? Did you see CEO Mo? When you were at the resort, wasn't President Mo there?" As he spoke, he leaned closer with a gossipy expression, carefully observing Jinwan's expression. Jinwan smiled and hit the nail on the head. "So from the beginning, you and Xiaoba knew that I would meet him and you did it on purpose?" Seeing her ungrateful attitude, Xia Tian snorted. "I can see that you've never been interested in other men. You can't always be single. Now MN Group is quite stable in all aspects. You don't need to work so hard. It's time to consider your relationship. If you still can't let go of Xiao Mo, there's nothing to let go of. It's all in the past." Jinwan lowered her eyes and looked at the things on the desk. "Who sent these documents?" Seeing that Jinwan was about to go straight into work and didn't want to talk at all, Xia Tian smiled at her and narrowed her eyes. "I just heard the girl at the front desk say that you came back in a black Bugatti. Although this kind of luxury car is common in high city, your car isn't a Bugatti, right? Where's your car? Whose car did you come back in?" Jinwan held her forehead in silence and leafed through the documents at hand. Seeing her stubborn attitude, Xia Tian sighed. "What did we say when we were both single? Either we stay single together or we get married and have children together. Now I'm about to give birth to a child. What about you? You don't even have a man close to you. If you really don't want to have anything to do with the people from before, then why have you always been so cold to Mr. Vince? He's good in all aspects and he's been waiting for you for more than 3 years. Tell me you." Jinwan shook her head. "I don't like men who are too shrewd." "Then why didn't you refuse him earlier?" "I refused him, but Mr. Vince just pretended that I didn't say that and didn't pester me again. He just occasionally invited me to dinner or helped me occasionally. He didn't make me hate him as a pursuer. I didn't even have a reason to drive him away." "So you mean that as long as these excellent men learn to restrain themselves in front of you and don't make you hate them, you'll actually like them?" Jinwan had never thought about this. At least, she had never considered the problem of love in recent years. "Right now I'm not interested in men, so don't worry about it. I've just come back to China, and you and Xiaoba are already busy playing matchmakers for me? Do you not want me to live a peaceful life?" Jinwan rolled her eyes at Xia Tian. Xia Tian snorted. Xiao Ba said that although you've experienced brilliant things in England these years, you're obviously lacking in love. Especially in the first year, you often stared out of the window in a daze, as if you couldn't even hear people calling you. Xiao Ba and I were thinking that we should get you married before the age of 25. Otherwise, it's really difficult for a career woman like you to find a suitable man with looks, money and capital. In a few years when you're older, it'll be even more difficult to find a man. Xia Tian's last sentence was held back in her mouth. She thought about it and didn't say it. What she wanted to add was, furthermore, she's divorced and her ex-husband is someone like Mo Jingshan. Who knows who would be able to marry her? She couldn't say this. Looking at Jin Wan's current attitude, if she said this, she would inevitably be kicked out. She wouldn't be able to enter MN Group's office building until she gave birth and finished her confinement. After all, she had worked hard for MN Group for so many years. If she angered Jin Wan overnight and was kicked out, it wouldn't be worth it. Chapter 449. Xia Tian glanced at her. You agreed to it yourself. I didn't force you to go. Besides, it would be even better if the person was Mo Jingshan. Jin Wan didn't answer. At this time, the boss of Heng Cheng came to MN Group in person, saying that he wanted to see Jin Wan. Jin Wan answered the phone and took a look at Xia Tian. When did Heng Cheng's people come? They came yesterday. I didn't want to disturb your vacation, so I didn't call you. Jin Wan nodded and said no more. She closed the documents in her hand and got up. Tell them to wait for me in the reception room. The boss of Heng Cheng is still upset because of the two men who humiliated him last time. Yesterday he came with his men. Are you sure you want to see him in person? Jin Wan didn't speak and walked out of the office. When she came to the reception room, she saw the boss of Heng Cheng, who was just a burly man in his 40s. He was bald and wore a big gold chain around his neck, looking like a typical nouveau riche. She had thought that the people of Heng Cheng were very capable, but it turned out that they were just relying on the imposing manner of their boss. As soon as Jin Wan came in, the boss of Heng Cheng threatened to beat her up, but Jin Wan just stood by the door calmly and looked at the boss and his men. She shook her fingers calmly as if counting. The boss of Heng Cheng stopped and glared at her, asking, "What the hell are you counting?" Jin Wan said calmly, "I'm counting how long it will be before your company goes bankrupt." The boss of Heng Cheng froze. He came here in person today because the government had turned against him and put pressure on his company. He was so angry that he came to meet Jin Wan, who was said to be very young. However, he didn't expect that the security guards in the reception room had already begun to scuffle with them, but this slender woman was so calm that it made him feel guilty. Seeing that they had stopped fighting, Jin Wan walked over and glanced indifferently at the security guards with minor injuries on their faces. Yesterday, before you came here to find me, you must have been warned by the government, right? Did you come here to make trouble because you have nowhere else to go and want to get some benefits from me, or just want to come here to demonstrate your power? By the way, I almost forgot to tell you that although our MN Group started in the real estate industry, we have been doing more network technology projects in the UK in recent years. Although MN Group is located on the west side of the city and doesn't look very big, we even have surveillance cameras in our lounge, not to mention such a large reception room. She sat down at the table, put one hand on the table, curled her fingers and slowly and gently tapped on the table. I'll report the number of injuries on our security guards one by one. Besides, you should know why you didn't meet me in the company yesterday. I was invited to the seaside resort with the leaders of the province and city, and there are only a few people who can talk to the leaders of the city. Are you sure you want to make trouble for me? If I'm in a bad mood, I'll be so angry that I won't let you go, and you won't even have a chance to catch your breath. Do you think I'll tell you who will be the unluckiest one? The boss of Heng Cheng was stunned. Jin Wan said, the domestic real estate industry is now in a very critical period. The government's regulation needs the cooperation of all the major companies. Although Heng Cheng has a strong capital chain, it doesn't know how to keep a low profile in this industry. Standing in front of you are many more sensible and obedient companies that the government wants to support, not just our MN Group. Heng Cheng has been occupying all the land for the past 3 years, and the government has been dissatisfied with you for a long time. Now it's just a matter of time. You know what will happen to you. Now the land is full of new rich people, and your company has long lost its momentum. A wise man submits to the times. If you let go now and admit defeat to the government, you may be able to save your company's brand. If you're too late, I'm afraid. The domestic real estate industry was indeed a mix of dragons and snakes. A few years ago, although all the major forces were on the rise, there was a property bubble for more than half a year later. Many people sold everything they could and ended up suffering heavy losses. Now all the big shots in the industry wanted to get a piece of the pie. Those who could stand firm might be able to stand for a while, but if they just wanted to stand firm and wanted to snatch meat from the government, then they really had lived too long. The boss of Hung Ching Group didn't expect that a young woman like Jin Wan would say these words, instead of calling the security guards and the police in a panic as he had expected. But these few words were enough to make him loosen his grip on the security guard's clothes. He hesitated and looked at Jin Wan again, only to find that she was still sitting there coldly and indifferently, showing no intention of escaping in this messy situation. The boss of Hung Ching saw that she pushed open the door of the reception room and came in alone. Except for the security guards who came in at the beginning, she didn't bring anyone with her. She was so calm and composed, which meant that she must have talked to the leaders of the province or city. She must know some of the plans of the people above, which was why she was so confident. Thinking of this, the boss of Hung Ching glared at Jin Wan again. "Little girl, you're very bold." Jin Wan smiled. "I dare not. It doesn't matter whether I'm bold or not. What matters is who can see the current situation better. In this world you can't win by playing tough. Even if you take your men to tear down my MN group today, you won't get any benefits. If you want to vent your anger, you can, but you'd better invest your money in the right places instead of going against MN Group for such a failed tender document. It's okay to go against us, but don't forget that the person behind us is the person you can't defeat. If I remember correctly, your Hung Ching Group should have been invited to the exhibition I attended these 2 days, but it was cancelled at the last minute. What's going on?" The boss of Hung Cheng's face darkened. Obviously, he knew that he was about to be abandoned by his superiors and that he couldn't even take care of himself. Chapter 450. Xiaoba had just called the police, but before the police arrived, when she rushed to the reception room, she saw the boss of Hung Ching leave with a red face. Xiaoba looked outside the door in surprise for a while. When these people left, she hurried in, only to see Jin Wan sitting in the middle of the reception room, calm as if nothing had happened. "Boss, are you all right?" "I'm fine. Did you call the police?" "Yes, I saw you stay inside and didn't come out. I was afraid something might happen, so I called the police." Jin Wan nodded. "All right. Let them go to the police station to make a statement and let the higher-ups know. It's also a show of strength to them, and they won't come to MN Group to behave atrociously in the future." Xiaoba didn't quite understand what she said, but seeing that Jin Wan didn't seem to be frightened at all, she thought that Jin Wan had encountered all kinds of problems in London in recent years and always handled them well. It seemed that she worried too much. 2 days later, the boss of Hung Ching went to the government to plead for leniency. Obviously, he no longer deliberately targeted MN Group. In less than 2 days, Hung Cheng's forces in High City were disbanded. Even the boss of Hung Ching didn't dare to come out again, let alone the others. MN Group finally calmed down. On the weekend, Jin Wan didn't go to the company during the day. She cleaned the house alone, went to the supermarket to buy some food and made a perfect lunch at home. In the afternoon she did yoga for more than an hour. As she was finishing up on the floor, she suddenly received a phone call. She rolled on the carpet and directly rolled to the sofa. Then she sat up and picked up the phone on the coffee table. "Hello. Miss G, this is Vince." The man's voice came from the phone, accompanied by the sound of the car brakes. "I've made a reservation at the restaurant tonight. I'm free in the afternoon, so I came to pick you up." Jin Wan grabbed the cell phone, got up, ran to the window and saw that Mr. Vince's car was parked downstairs. "Didn't you say 5 o'clock in the evening? It's only 3 o'clock. Jin Wan glanced at the time. "It hasn't been long since you came back. Didn't you say that you would move after a short rest? I came to see if you have anything you need to move." Mr. Vince said simply, "Can I go up and sit for a while?" From a distance, Jin Wan saw the door of the car open, and Mr. Vince in a suit got out of the car, but he didn't rush into the apartment. Instead, he looked up as if to find out which apartment Jin Wan was in. "Then wait a moment, I'll go down." Mr. Vince could tell that she didn't want him to go up to her apartment. He sighed with a smile. "I can't do anything to you in broad daylight, so I came to see what things you need to move, but you didn't even want me to go up. My house is in a mess. It's not convenient for me to entertain you now." Jin Wan said simply and hung up the phone decisively. Mr. Vince sighed with a smile and put his phone in his pocket when she rejected him so decisively. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, Jin Wan went downstairs. She had changed her clothes and her shoulder-length hair was blown back by the wind. She looked natural and beautiful without any makeup. She looked more beautiful than many women with delicate makeup on the street. Other girls your age go out for dinner or a movie on the weekends, but you've been cooped up at home on such a nice day. You've only come downstairs now? Mr. Vince asked with a smile as he opened the car door. No, I went to the supermarket in the morning, but I just bought some things and went home. Jinwan sat in the car and said, the restaurant you booked can't go to until 5 o'clock in the evening. You came so early and my house is in a mess. It's not convenient for you to go in. We can't just sit in the car and chat for 2 hours, can we? Mr. Vince looked at her with a smile. If you agree, I'd be happy to chat with you in such a small space for as long as you want. Jinwan glanced at him and withdrew her gaze. Anyway, we're going to the business street tonight. I know a good coffee shop there. I used to buy coffee there when I was still running a studio. The taste is very good. Why don't we go there and have a seat? Okay, let's go. Jinwan fastened her seat belt. Seeing her energetic look, Mr. Vince smiled and turned the steering wheel. When the car drove out of her apartment, he asked, have you decided where you want to move to? Near your company in the West City District, or somewhere else with good scenery and air? I haven't had time to think about it recently. Anyway, it's enough to have a place to live for the time being. I usually take time to go back to the G family to accompany my father. As for moving, although it was in my plan, I've almost given up on it. I really don't have time to choose a house. The dozens of villas built by BGY Group in the suburbs are not bad. Shall I help you buy one with the best scenery? There's no need. The buildings your company usually builds in the city take up too much space. Most of them are built around the suburbs. Although the air is good and suitable for many rich people, people like me who can't even be bothered to drive are more suitable to live near the company. I have a few apartments in the West City District. They've been renovated, but I haven't lived in them before. One of them is very close to your company. If you haven't decided where to move to, you can move to my place first. There's really no need. I won't charge you for the room. If you move in, I'll hand all the keys and room cards to you. It's not like I can just barge in. What are you afraid of? Jinwan smiled. I heard that you came to High City because of BGY Group's work. You weren't originally from High City. Now you actually have so many houses here. But the West City District is a little too remote. Why do you have an apartment there? If I tell you the truth, I'm afraid you'll hide even further. What? Chapter 451. It turned out that not just a few apartments, but many apartments near her company that she might live in. Jinwan's heart was not really made of iron. Even if she couldn't accept it emotionally, she would still feel touched and guilty in her heart. After all, for the past 3 years, he had been sent to England from time to time, and he often went to London to help her. The reason why she had been able to go so smoothly in the past few years was indeed because she had many benefactors. Although Mr. Vince had not been in London for very long, he had helped her a lot and often helped her a lot. Let me treat you to coffee today. Jinwan paused for a moment and raised her voice to say, every time I want to thank you, I say I'll treat you, but every time I treat you, you rush to pay for me. Neither of us is short of money, but I may really owe you a lot in other ways. I have to find the simplest way to pay you back. Mr. Vince was silent for a moment and then chuckled. If you can stop treating me like an outsider, I'll pay you back. This is a separate matter and can't be counted together. You treat me to dinner tonight and I treat you to coffee in the afternoon. This is reciprocity. Reciprocity? Mr. Vince suddenly stopped the car and turned to look at Jinwan, who was sitting in the passenger seat. Dear Miss G, the reciprocity I hope is much deeper than this. Jinwan raised the corners of her lips and smiled, but she didn't reply. Mr. Vince continued driving. After finding a parking space near the commercial street, he said, you refused to accept the bracelet I gave you last time, so my mother, who suddenly came back to China, saw it at home. She kept asking me if I fell in love with a girl and insisted that I introduce her to her. She wouldn't leave until she saw that I have a stable and soon married woman by my side. Do you think I'm really old enough? If I don't get married soon, my parents' hair will turn white from worry? Jinwan seemed to understand something from his words and turned to look at him. You specially invited me out to dinner tonight. Do you want me to meet your mother? Mr. Vince rubbed the space between his eyebrows in distress. I did have that intention, but I didn't dare to carry it out. How could I force you like this without your consent? Is your mother still in High City? Yes, she also knows that I'm going to treat you to dinner tonight, and she keeps saying that she wants to see you, but I stopped her. Although I didn't say anything about our relationship, she insisted that I had a girlfriend and didn't tell my family. This woman starts to worry about her children when she gets older, and now she's especially worried about her children's marriage. I really can't dissuade her," Mr. Vince said as he signaled for her to get out of the car. After getting out of the car, Jinwan took a look at the cafe not far away and then at Mr. Vince, who had just gotten out of the car. They smiled at each other and pointed in the direction of the cafe, meaning to tell him that this was the cafe she was talking about. Jinwan turned and walked over, not noticing the black Bugatti parked on the other side of the parking lot and the black ghost at the back that was familiar to her at a glance. After entering the cafe, the two of them sat down in an empty seat near the bar on the first floor. Jinwan asked for an Americano, and Mr. Vince asked for the same as hers. It was just a leisurely afternoon. Jinwan talked about some interesting things that happened when she was in London and some events that Mr. Vince was involved in. The two of them chatted happily. Suddenly, a well-dressed elderly woman came over. As soon as the woman came over, Mr. Vince, who had been talking casually, suddenly froze. He looked at the woman and then at Jinwan, who was confused. The old, beautiful woman gave Mr. Vince a wink and then looked at Jinwan. She asked in confusion, "You're this lady, right?" Jinwan took a look at the beautiful woman. Seeing her eager and excited eyes, she seemed to understand something and nodded politely to the woman. "Hello, Auntie." At this moment, Mr. Vince was no longer as calm as he usually was in front of her. He coughed helplessly and awkwardly, put down the coffee cup, and looked at the beautiful woman with a slightly reproachful expression. "Mom, why did you follow us?" Jinwan? Sure enough, he did follow her all the way here quietly. The beautiful woman smiled and sat down next to Mr. Vince, then looked at Jinwan with a smile. "Girl, how old are you this year?" Jinwan. 24. 24? Alas, you're 10 years younger than my son. My son is used to living alone. He hasn't married or brought a girlfriend home since he's in his 30s. His father and I live abroad all year round and don't have time to come to see him. It's rare for me to come back to see him. When I finally found that he seemed to be in a relationship, he hid it from me. Fortunately, I found that he didn't seem to be going to work when he went out today, so I secretly took a taxi and followed him. I saw him pick you up and then the two of you came here for coffee and I finally saw my future daughter-in-law. Cough, cough. Jinwan choked on her saliva, which tasted of coffee. It was so bitter that she coughed twice in a row and her cheeks turned slightly red. Seeing this, the beautiful woman blushed. Ignoring Mr. Vince, she reached out to hold Jinwan's hand on the table and asked with a smile, "Girl, what's your surname?" "Auntie, you may have misunderstood. Mr. Vince and I are not like what you think." Chapter 452. If Jinwan had known that the bracelet would cause such a big trouble, she would have accepted it even if she had to ignore her conscience. But from the looks of it, Mr. Vince's house should have very few women's belongings. Otherwise, his mother wouldn't have thought of so many things just because of a simple bracelet. It could be seen that he was a very clean person. Xia Tian always said that she should have such a person by her side. Although she really didn't need a relationship, Mr. Vince was really a good man. Seeing Jinwan's awkward and amused expression, Mr. Vince said, "Miss G is the CEO of MN Group. She just came back from England. Although we often contact each other, it's not what you think." "Why is it not what I think? If it were another woman, I wouldn't be so sure." Seeing Jinwan's awkward expression, the beautiful woman withdrew her hand and said to Mr. Vince, "Your bracelet is engraved with the letters Jianyuan. You just called her Miss G. Didn't you give it to her?" Mr. Vince didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "This is a misunderstanding." "What misunderstanding? Are you afraid that your father and I will ask you about these things all day after you have a girlfriend? Don't worry, after today I won't ask any more. But since we've met, let me get to know this Miss G better." The beautiful woman then looked at Jinwan with a smile. "Miss G, right?" Jinwan slightly smiled. "Auntie, you really misunderstood." The beautiful woman clicked her tongue. "You two really have a tacit understanding. My son has never been interested in women. Since your name is engraved on that bracelet, it shows that he really cares about you. And since you two have your own achievements in your careers, it's good that you can help and support each other. The man is 10 years older than you and he loves you more. The man is handsome and the woman is beautiful. You two are really a good match." With that, the beautiful woman took off a green bracelet from her wrist and took Jinwan's hand to put it on for her. "This is the first time I met you, so I was in a hurry and didn't prepare a gift for you. This jade bracelet is a good thing I got from an antique friend not long ago. It just so happens that you don't wear any jewelry on your wrist. Let's take this bracelet as a gift." Next time you come to our house, I'll prepare a gift for you. Auntie, no. Mr. Vince and I are just business partners. To be honest, we're just friends. Jean Wan hurriedly pulled her hand out, but Mr. Vince's mother was not only well-dressed but also strong. She put the bracelet on Jean Wan's wrist. Mr. Vince could have reached out to stop her, but he didn't. Seeing that things had come to this point, he simply took advantage of the situation and didn't say anything more. He just looked at Jean Wan. Since my mother has given it to you, just take it. It's just an ordinary bracelet. It's not a particularly meaningful or tacky heirloom. It looks good on you. Mr. Vince looked at the green bracelet on Jean Wan's slender, white wrist and said with a faint smile. Yes, I've never seen a young girl look so good on this kind of jade bracelet. Miss G, your skin is really white. It looks good on you. The beautiful woman also had a look of admiration on her face. It was as if this bracelet was enough to ensnare her future daughter-in-law. Jean Wan's wrist was indeed very thin. The bracelet was put on easily and taken off quickly. She took it off and put it on the table. Auntie. Jean Wan's eyes were gentle, and her voice didn't mean to make the best of a mistake. My relationship with Mr. Vince is really ordinary. If you insist on doing this, I'm afraid I can't sit here and drink coffee anymore. After all, we are business partners. In the future, we will meet frequently in the business world. It's too embarrassing to mess up our relationship like this. Seeing that Jean Wan didn't seem to be joking, the beautiful woman looked at the jade bracelet she put on the table, looked at Jean Wan, who was serious and patient enough to explain, and then turned to Mr. Vince. This? Mr. Vince raised his hand and rubbed between his eyebrows. He didn't know whether it was because of Jean Wan's refusal that gave him a headache or because of his mother, but he just said, Mom, to tell you the truth, I did plan to give the bracelet to her, but if I want her to be my girlfriend, I have to win her heart. I'm still pursuing her, but unfortunately, I haven't won her heart. Miss G is just Miss G, not my girlfriend. The beautiful woman paused. Haven't you won her heart yet? Mr. Vince spread his hands helplessly. Your son's charm doesn't work on her. She just wanted to invite Mr. Vince for coffee, but it turned out that such an occasion was really inappropriate for Jean Wan. Auntie, Mr. Vince, you talk. I'm going to the bathroom. Jean Wan said politely, picked up her handbag on the table, got up and walked into the coffee shop. When Jean Wan came out of the bathroom, she thought that Mr. Vince and his mother should have explained enough, so she just needed to go back and chat casually. It shouldn't be too embarrassing. Just as she was about to go over, she suddenly saw a figure coming down from the second floor. Behind him were two well-known financial figures in the industry who also came down. How could she meet Mo Jingshin in such a place? Jean Wan stood behind a glass wall and didn't go out. She watched the backs of Mo Jingshin and the two financial people walk out of the coffee shop. When they walked to the parking lot, she saw that Shinmu had been waiting there for a long time. At this moment, she caught a glimpse of a familiar black ghost and a black Bugatti parked in an inconspicuous place in the shade of the parking lot. It turned out that they had been here a long time ago, but she hadn't noticed them. Just now they were upstairs and she was downstairs. Mo Jingshin shouldn't have seen her, right? Jean Wan walked out from behind the glass wall. She didn't mean to avoid Mo Jingshin, but she was really unprepared to meet him in this coffee shop, not to mention the scene just now was really embarrassing. Chapter 453. She glanced at the parking lot and the two cars outside, pulled over a waiter next to her and asked, Sir, where were those gentlemen sitting just now? The waiter looked her up and down. Miss, do you mean Mr. Mo? Jean Wan immediately glanced at the waiter thoughtfully. Do you know him? In the past few years, Mr. Mo would often choose to meet with friends or important people here to discuss work. As long as Mr. Mo is here, all the private rooms on the second floor will not be open to the public. Just now, Mr. Mo was sitting on the second floor railing. He has been there for a long time and just left. The waiter said politely, Miss, you found it too late. If you wanted to say hello to Mr. Mo, you could have done it 10 minutes earlier, but now he has left. Listening to his words, it seemed that when Mo Jingshin came here, people would often try to find an opportunity to greet him or introduce themselves. This waiter was already used to people like her who were inquiring about Mr. Mo. But at this moment, Jean Wan was silently looking in the direction the waiter had pointed out. Wasn't the place on the second floor right above where she had just sat? Furthermore, the second floor of the cafe wasn't completely enclosed. From the railings on the second floor, one could have a clear view of all the customers and activities on the first floor. Just now, when she was below them, not only did he see their every move, he probably also heard a lot of their conversation. So, he saw everything she said and did to Mr. Vince and Mr. Vince's mother just now? Jinwan looked outside again. Seeing that Mo Jingshan's car had driven away, she returned to the seat in front of Mr. Vince and sat down. Mr. Vince's mother must have felt embarrassed and left when Jinwan went to the bathroom, but the bracelet was still on the table. I'm sorry for what happened just now. When Jinwan sat down, Mr. Vince chuckled. Although I did intend to push the boat with the current, fortunately you didn't fall out with me. Hearing his words, Jinwan didn't say anything more. She just smiled. Auntie is very interesting, but you're really old enough to get married. From your words, it seems like you've never intended to be my marriage target? Jinwan had made it clear, but she felt she should emphasize it at this time. You know, I don't intend to think about this for years, Mr. Vince. Since we're sitting here talking about this, let's make it clear. I can be business partners or friends, but I'm afraid I can't have a deeper relationship with you. I hope Mr. Vince can look elsewhere and don't waste your time with me. Mr. Vince looked at her for a while, chuckled and didn't say more. He gestured for her to put away the jade bracelet on the table. Since my mother has decided to give this bracelet to you, she can't take it back. Take this bracelet. Even to a friend, I should give you some gifts occasionally. I didn't even take your bracelet. This bracelet belongs to your mother, so I won't take it back. You'd better take it back and give it to someone you should give it to. You're always like this. In the past 3 years I've tried to get closer to you several times in London, but every time I took a step forward, you took a step back. If I get closer to you, I'm afraid you'll avoid me even more. He looked at her face. Jinwan, why do you do this? Since you went to the UK after a divorce, it means that your previous relationship and marriage are over. Why do you keep your relationship empty? If I'm not the type you like, I'll accept it. But you just refuse to let any man get close to you. How can I be reconciled with that? Whether you are reconciled or not, it doesn't matter. Jinwan looked at him as usual. If you want to continue the dinner tonight, I'd better advise you to regard me as a good friend, Mr. Vince. Otherwise, I'm afraid I'll have to leave before 5 o'clock for dinner. Mr. Vince knew Jinwan's temper. He had been rejected by her countless times and was used to her thorn-like attitude when faced with this kind of question. At this moment, seeing Jinwan so resolute, he looked into her eyes, smiled, and understood why she refused him so bluntly. In fact, Jinwan had wanted to have a good talk with Mr. Vince. In recent years, Mr. Vince had been really good to her, and she didn't want to let him down. But perhaps because Mr. Vince's mother let Jinwan see her true heart, she really refused him in her heart. So there was no need to leave any room for ambiguity. It was almost 5 o'clock when they walked out of the coffee shop. Before Jinwan walked to the parking lot, she subconsciously looked back at the coffee shop behind her. She clearly remembered that Mo Jingshan didn't like to drink coffee. In fact, she didn't like it very much either. However, when she worked in the studio, she often passed by this place and would buy some coffee for her colleagues. She gradually got used to drinking here and gradually became a regular customer. But why did Mo Jingshan come here so often in recent years? In the evening, after dinner in an Italian restaurant, Mr. Vince invited her to go to a movie with him. She could see that Mr. Vince's original purpose today was to promote their relationship, but he was embarrassed by Jinwan. But she still had to carry out the plan. Besides, the theater had been booked. If she didn't go, she would be letting down Mr. Vince's kindness. Anyway, she had said what she should say, so she didn't refuse to go to the movie. There were only 2 people in the VIP theater in the center of High City. Mr. Vince must have asked Secretary Yang for the way to go on a date. When he went in, he bought popcorn and Coke for Jinwan. Jinwan smiled and thanked him. After entering, she focused on watching the movie. The 2 of them sat in their seats and didn't say anything. The movie lasted for 2 hours. It was a good Hollywood blockbuster. When they walked out of the theater, it was already 10 o'clock in the evening. Chapter 454. In order to get a kiss, do you have to learn this kind of dating method of eating and watching a movie? This kind of young way is no longer suitable for people of your status. The scene of a general manager of the BGY group, who is worth hundreds of millions of yuan, holding 2 buckets of popcorn and Coke into the cinema, I find it incredible. Jinwan said as she took out her cell phone to check the time, and her fingers inadvertently touched the photo album. Last time when she accompanied Ji Hongwen to the temple, she took a picture of the so-called perfect long stick she drew with her cell phone. The golden perfect circle fell into her sight. Until now, she hadn't understood what the so-called original life trajectory and the new life trajectory meant, but because the master said the word perfect, She felt it should be a very good sign, so she took a picture of the long stick with her cell phone before leaving. She had planned to find time to ask other people who could interpret the long stick, but after taking the picture she forgot about it. Now that her fingers inadvertently opened the photo album, she remembered it. Not looking at Jean-Wan, who was staring at her cell phone, Mr. Vince sighed with a smile as he drove. The point is that you never accepted all kinds of expensive gifts I gave you. I wondered if you had a more down-to-earth heart, so I tried various ways to win you over, but in the end it didn't work. Are you very depressed? Jean-Wan casually slid her fingers through the photo album and said with a smile. Yes, depressed. At this time, Mr. Vince had parked the car in the parking space downstairs of her apartment. He turned his eyes, looked at the fair little face in the darkness of the car because of the light from the cell phone screen, casually put his hand on the steering wheel and asked jokingly, "So do you want to give me a consolation prize?" Jean-Wan's mind was still on the long stick in the photo album on her cell phone. For a moment she didn't know what to say, but instinctively felt that they had arrived home. She raised her eyes from the cell phone and glanced at him. What consolation prize? With that she looked out again. But I really should thank Mr. Vince for your hospitality today. I'm really ashamed of you to be picked up and escorted by a car. Before Jean-Wan could finish her words, she suddenly felt a warmth on her cheeks. She froze, and the brightness of the phone made her face even more obvious. She turned around abruptly and saw that Mr. Vince had already returned to the driver's seat, his hands on the steering wheel, and said with an indifferent and gentlemanly smile, "This kind of face-to-face kiss is very common in Western countries. It's not like you haven't seen it in London. I'm not asking for much. Besides, I didn't ask you to reciprocate with the same courtesy. This kind of consolation prize shouldn't be too much." An imperceptible coldness flashed across Jean-Wan's eyes. She immediately turned off her phone, and the anger in her heart was concealed by her calm expression. When she was in England, she had met a man who suddenly hugged her and kissed her on the cheek. But that kind of foreign man was really just expressing his courtesy and love. Although Mr. Vince insisted on associating the kiss on the cheek with a kiss on the cheek, Jean-Wan thought about it and did not say anything in the end. She put the phone back into her bag and pushed the door open as if nothing had happened. Before getting out of the car, she said, "Thank you for today." With that, she closed the door. The car window was suddenly lowered, and Mr. Vince looked at Jean-Wan's expressionless face. "Are you angry?" Jean-Wan responded, "I am a little angry, but after all, we are adults. This kind of kiss on the cheek is not taking advantage of me. I can't be angry with you because of this, Mr. Vince. After all, you did help me a lot in London these years. Even if I don't owe you anything, I still have some feelings for you." Mr. Vince could tell from her tone that she was about to fall out with him but was obviously restraining herself, so he got out of the car and walked up to her. "I'm sorry. It's just that you refused me too straightforwardly today. Every man has a desire to conquer. The more you resist, the more instinctively I want to approach you. I was rude just now. It doesn't matter, but I've almost said what I wanted to say today. In the future, we'd better not see each other except for work." He apologized again. "Sorry, I can give you time to calm down, but apart from work, I still hope to maintain a friendship with you. This kind of thing won't happen again. It's late. Mr. Vince, go back early." Jean-Wan didn't say much but directly asked him to leave. Mr. Vince knew that she was not making a mountain out of a molehill. It was just that she was too principled in this aspect. If she could be easily approached by anyone, she would have been surrounded by countless men in the past 3 years. He had been careful not to take a step forward for 3 years. Maybe it was because the stars were too beautiful tonight, or maybe it was just because his heart was moved. Just now in the car, he kissed her if he wanted to, but he didn't expect to be treated so coldly. "All right." He didn't say more and gave her time to calm down. Before turning back to the car, he thought for a moment and turned back to look at Jean-Wan, who had turned and was about to leave. He wanted to say something, but Jean-Wan had already walked away without looking back. Mr. Vince looked at her back and sighed with a smile. A woman who went to another country because of the failure of her last marriage and had completely closed her heart was really difficult to conquer. But people were such cheap people. Although they knew that there might not be any result, the more they couldn't have, the more they liked it. Mr. Vince drove away. Jean-Wan walked through the lawn and the beautiful green park decorated by the property management. She looked at the time. It was almost 11 o'clock at night. No wonder there was no one around. Hearing that Mr. Vince's car had left, she glanced back and saw several cars parked in several parking spaces downstairs. However, she couldn't see the models and license plates clearly in the dark. She only vaguely saw the silhouette of a familiar car, but she didn't take it to heart. She turned around and went straight into the apartment building. She went in and found that it was dark inside. Even the elevator had stopped. She remembered that the lights in the neighborhood were not on. No wonder it was dark everywhere. Chapter 455. The property manager said that an emergency repair team had gone over and it was expected to be repaired in an hour, so Jinwan hung up the phone. Since it could be repaired in an hour, Jinwan planned to wait until it was repaired before going upstairs. But it was already 11 o'clock at night and there was no one around. Her cell phone had less than 10% of battery left, which was not enough to last for an hour. She lived on the 15th floor. She could climb the stairs, but she would probably be so tired that her legs and stomach would tremble. Standing there for a while, Jinwan turned on the flashlight on her cell phone, and with this light and the last few percent of battery left, she went straight into the escalator passage. Fortunately, she was not wearing high heels today. When she climbed to the 8th floor, she stood still and gasped for breath for a while, but she couldn't stop to rest when climbing stairs at such a high speed. If she stopped for a while, it would be harder for her to climb up. She leaned against the railing and panted for a long time before she lifted her heavy feet and continued to walk up. When she reached the 13th floor, Jinwan felt that her chest was about to explode. She felt that she might die if she climbed 2 more floors. She gritted her teeth and finally reached the 15th floor. She was so tired that her legs and stomach were trembling, and she staggered weakly to the door of her apartment in the dark. The little battery on her cell phone had been used up after she passed the 10th floor because of the power consumption of the cell phone. She walked up the next few floors in the dark. Now there was no battery and the fingerprint lock and room card were useless. She put her cell phone into her bag, then rummaged back and forth in her bag for a long time before she found the door key in the hidden compartment. She took out the key and was about to open the door when she suddenly smelled a faint smell of smoke. Her hand, which was holding the key, paused. In the darkness, she instinctively looked toward the other side of the staircase. She only saw a red spark flickering on the tip of a person's finger. Someone was actually smoking here in the middle of the night. It was so dark that she couldn't see anything clearly. She could only vaguely see a tall man walking down the escalator between the 15th and 16th floors towards her step by step. Jinwan subconsciously clenched the key. She couldn't see anything in the dark, but she had heard of all kinds of robberies or murders in China over the years. It was so late and dark. If she opened the door, she would invite thieves to her home. But the elevator couldn't work without electricity, and the corridor was dark. This apartment had 1 unit per floor and there was only 1 unit on each floor. There were no neighbors or people who lived opposite her. If something happened to her here, it would be impossible for her to call for help. Who? Jinwan asked coldly to show that she was not to be trifled with. However, the other party didn't seem to be frightened by her at all. She even heard him chuckle, a faint chuckle that came from his chest. She clenched the key in her hand, thought for a while, and was about to ask him what his purpose was. If he wanted money, she could give him some money. After all, it was important to stay alive. In this world, only a fool would try to show off. Whether to call the police or not, she had to save her life first. But before she spoke, she saw the man casually throw the cigarette to the ground, and the spark was trampled out by him. In the empty and quiet escalator passage, there was a hissing sound that made her heart tremble. For a moment, Jinwan wondered if he was a neighbor who had forgotten to bring his keys or someone else. She wondered if she should ask him if he was here to rob her to avoid any misunderstandings. However, the man's figure had approached her in an instant. Just as she was about to cry for help, he pressed her heavily against the door. "What are you doing? Help, ugh." The moment her body was imprisoned against the door, her voice was abruptly sealed by the man's kiss before it could make much noise and power. The cool taste mixed with the smell of tobacco immediately sealed her lips. Jinwan's mind went blank. She had just climbed 15 floors and hadn't recovered yet. At this moment, her legs were weak and trembling. She instinctively raised her hand to push him away, but she was firmly pressed by him. The kiss on her lips was so aggressive that she couldn't distinguish it for a moment. Her heart was trembling violently. She was about to defend herself with the method Feng Ling had taught her, but the moment she raised her wrist, the man seemed to have predicted it. He raised one hand to hold her wrist, pressed her hands to her sides and kissed her lips fiercely. Taking advantage of the time when she had just climbed up the stairs and was weak, he easily opened her lips. The man's kiss became more and more aggressive, but Jinwan, who had been desperately trying to resist, gradually calmed down. She leaned weakly against the door. At this moment, not only was she so tired that her legs were tangled, but now all the blood in her body was trembling. She was so flustered that she couldn't tell who the man in front of her was, but even if her vision was affected by the smoke, such a kiss, such entanglement and such a smell were all familiar. She stiffly leaned against the door without moving, but the man kissed her even more fiercely than when she was struggling. It was as though he wanted to bite through her lips and swallow her into his stomach. He kissed her deeply. Jinwan was so tired that even breathing felt pain in her lungs. At this moment she was deprived of all the air. She was kissed so hard that she saw stars and could barely stand against the door. Seeing that she was no longer struggling, the man firmly nailed her to the door, held her waist with one hand and fixed her face with the other, not giving her any room to escape. He kissed her wantonly as if he wanted to make up for all the emptiness in the past 3 years at this moment, until he tasted a trace of blood. He didn't know if his tongue had been bitten by her, or if her lips had been bitten by him, but the moment the faint taste of blood filled their mouths, his kiss became gentler. He slowly absorbed the sweetness in her mouth as if he was pitying her, but also as if he couldn't control himself. Even if it was blood, he was willing to endure it. Jinwan was kissed until the man finally let go of her lips and pressed his forehead against hers. As if suppressing or restraining himself, he leaned against her and slowly calmed his breathing. Her lips were stained with the coolness of the air in the dark corridor. She could finally breathe. Chapter 456. There was not only the smell of tobacco on the man's body, but also the smell of alcohol. Although it was not strong, it was indeed the smell of alcohol. As if he didn't care whether she recognized him or not, the man imprisoned her body and said in a low, clear voice close to her, "What did you call me?" Jinwan leaned back. "Xiumo." He pressed his forehead against hers, his nose against hers, and his lips almost pressed against hers again, but because Jinwan moved back, there was a little distance between them. He didn't move closer and the lights in the corridor suddenly came on. Jinwan was dazzled by the sudden light and narrowed her eyes slightly. She was not used to the sudden light, but at the same time she saw the man in front of her clearly. Mo Jingshan was dressed in a suit and leather shoes, but the collar of his shirt was unbuttoned. He still looked as sanctimonious as he had in the coffee shop during the day, but who could have thought that the dignified COMO of Shine Group, who was known to be pure and ascetic, would come to his ex-wife's house in the middle of the night and kiss her until her legs were weak while the power was cut off. The point was that this ex-wife was thrown away by him. Jinwan really wanted to laugh, so she did smile at the man in front of her. It was cold and indifferent, without the slightest warmth. Even though her lips were a little red and hot and looked particularly seductive, her smile was still distant and indifferent, and her eyes were full of mockery. It was not the first time he heard her call him COMO. In the exhibition center in the resort, she called him COMO naturally and skillfully. Mo Jingshan gazed into her eyes. They were like a pair of black pearls reflected in the clear spring water in a secluded valley. They were clear and clean, sparkling and bright yet cold. The woman's eyelashes fluttered under the light. Slowly, it was as though she had long learned how to move people's hearts. He let go of her and took a step back, still looking as indifferent as if everything was under his control. Looking at Jinwan, who had to lean against the door to stand, he slowly said, "Call me that again." Jinwan said, "COMO, did you come to me to pretend to be crazy because you were drunk? Your alcohol tolerance isn't something an ordinary person can compare to. You're so drunk that you can't even tell reality from the faint smell of alcohol on your body? I should call you President Mo no matter what. What else do you want me to call you?" She paused and suddenly sneered, "Mr. Mo?" Mo Jingshan stared at her with a heavy and deep gaze. "Putting aside the honorific title, even the surname, won't you?" Jinwan chuckled. "Not suitable." His cold eyes narrowed slightly. "What's inappropriate?" She replied, "Neither is suitable." He slowly put one hand into his trouser pocket and stood half a meter away from her. He could see her whole image and looked at her coldly. "Is it suitable with someone else?" It seemed like he had seen her being mistaken as his daughter-in-law in the cafe and being kissed in the car at night. No wonder. She couldn't even recognize the car he parked downstairs. It was the same ghost, but she couldn't recognize it because of the power outage. Jinwan steadied her breath, leaned against the door and didn't look at him with her eyes half closed. She just lazily looked as if she were just catching up with an old friend and didn't feel a sense of crisis when a man approached her door. "What are you talking about, COMO? I don't think I understand." She glanced at the cigarette butt on the ground again. COMO should know what a non-smoking area is. You took advantage of the power outage to smoke in front of my house. Without electricity you can't trigger the fire alarm system, but you're so happy to release secondhand smoke in my house. With that, she took out the key from her bag again. Because her legs were weak, she leaned against the door and turned the key in the keyhole, saying, I just climbed 15 floors and still have no strength. If COMO wants to do something to me, I'm afraid I can't stop him. When she finally opened the door, she remembered that the electricity had been turned on and she could get in by pressing the password. She paused. Forget it. This way he wouldn't see the password of her door. Otherwise she might not be able to live here anymore. The door opened and Jinwan walked in with weak steps. She raised her hand and turned on the light. Seeing that the man didn't intend to come in, she smiled coldly at him. COMO, have you sobered up after kissing me? Do you know what you were doing just now? With that, he slammed the door shut with a bang, cutting off their line of sight. After entering the door, Jinwan threw her bag to the ground, bent down to rub her legs, and staggered to the sofa to sit down. Damn it, 15 floors was really not something ordinary people could climb. It was really killing her. After resting for a while, her legs were still numb. Jinwan leaned against the sofa with her eyes open and suddenly remembered something. She took out her cell phone from her bag and put it on the coffee table to charge. After looking at her cell phone for a while, her eyelids couldn't support her eyelids anymore, so she leaned against the sofa and closed her eyes to sleep for a while. Jinwan didn't wake up until her cell phone suddenly fell to the ground. She looked at the empty living room in confusion and then at the time. She had slept on the sofa for an hour. Sitting on the sofa, she thought for a while, put down her cell phone, got up, walked to the door and looked out through the peephole on the door. At this moment there was no one outside. She was in a daze just now and now she woke up with a start. For a moment, she even suspected that the Mo Jingshan who appeared in the corridor of her apartment might not be real. But her calves were still numb, which meant that it was true that she had climbed the 15th floor. Jinwan pushed the door open and looked out. Sure enough, the corridor was empty, and even the cigarette butt on the ground was gone. She looked thoughtfully at the empty corridor, paused for a while, raised her hand to rub her temples and turned to close the door. However, he suddenly stopped in his tracks and looked at the empty corridor again. He was gone and the cigarette butt had been taken away. But the faint smell of tobacco still lingered here. Even though it was very faint, this was a non-smoking area, and no one dared to smoke here under normal circumstances. So, it was true. At this moment, Jinwan's head hurt even more. She closed the door, raised her hands to rub her temples hard, and returned to the sofa to sit down. Perhaps because of the sudden climb to the 15th floor, she felt uncomfortable in all aspects. Her legs, feet and head hurt. After a while, she thought of going into the bathroom to soak her legs and feet in hot water for a while to relieve her fatigue. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.